Welcome back, dear listener, or perhaps welcome for the very first time. You've arrived at the fireside of the nighttime historian, where the hour grows late, the stars lean close, and stories from the deep past slip gently into the hush between waking and sleep. Before we begin tonight's journey, I invite you to share where you are listening from. Whether it's the glow of a city window, the quiet of a country road, a lantern-lit cabin, or a quiet corner on the far side of the world, it is always a joy to know where these tales are being heard, and by whom. Tonight, we step into a mythscape that stretches as wide as the rivers of Asia, as tall as the mountains that pierce the clouds. We walk into the legends of China, a land where jade peaks hide among the mists, where dragons coil through rivers and skies, and where immortals wander among mortals in disguise. These are stories carved in bronze and sung in festival drums, stories whispered by scholars and embroidered on silk, stories that have travelled across dynasties as steady as the constellations above. We will hear of creation itself, of chaos shaped into heaven and earth, of gods and goddesses who moulded clay into humankind, and of emperors who rose to the throne of heaven only for rebels to defy them. We will follow dragons that rule the seas, laughing across the waves, and lovers torn apart and reunited by stars. These are not only myths, they are reflections of how generations understood order and chaos, love and loss, ambition and destiny. So settle in, draw your blanket closer, let the noise of the day soften and drift away. We are going back, far back, to when the first mountains pressed upward from the mists, when rivers first carved their way through valleys, when the stars themselves were arranged by divine hands. This is the story of Chinese mythology, of Pangu and Nüwa, of heroes and villains fighting for cosmic order, to the beginning of time, when the world was yet unformed, and the first threads of destiny were woven beneath the jade sky. The world breathes in a rhythm older than memory, a rhythm you can almost feel beneath your feet if you stand still long enough. Mists spill down from mountains so high, their peaks vanish into a white ocean of cloud, like islands floating in the firmament. The air is cool here, fragrant with pine and the resin of old trees, and somewhere, softly, faintly, a temple bell answers the hour. The sound drifts like a ripple across the valleys, mingling with the murmur of unseen streams. The world is not yet busy with the noise of men. Here, the hills are watchful, the stones patient, and the wind moves as if it carries the breath of spirits. In the folds of those mountains lie temples the color of cinnabar and gold, their roofs arched like the backs of sleeping dragons. Paper lanterns sway in the morning air, their silk threads trembling as if whispering to the passing clouds. Incense coils burn in the shade of wide gates, sending slow spirals into the air, threads of perfume that twist upward toward the heavens. Each curl of smoke carries a prayer, for rain, for peace, for the safe return of a child. The stones underfoot are smoothed by centuries of quiet footsteps, each pilgrim leaving an unseen trace. Between the peaks, narrow rivers curl through green valleys, gleaming like strips of silk tossed by the hand of a goddess. Their voices are endless, telling stories in the language of water, of snowmelt from distant plateaus, of storms in the hills, of nights when the moon turns silver into liquid light. Above all this, unseen yet felt, the celestial courts watch. They are said to stand in the highest reaches of the firmament, beyond the veil of mortal sight, where clouds blaze like palaces of gold and vermilion. There, the Jade Emperor holds audience with gods and immortals, with dragons that coil between the pillars, with phoenixes that alight on lacquered balustrades. His halls echo with the murmur of divine decree, with the rustle of robes woven from the light of dawn. Yet these heavens are not distant in spirit. They gaze down upon the earth with the slow patience of eternity, their will carried by the wind, their warnings hidden in the curve of the river, the shadow of the mountain, the sudden stillness before rain. If you listen, truly listen, you may hear more than the call of the bell or the sigh of the forest. You may hear the turning of the sky itself, the great wheel by which seasons are drawn, by which rivers swell and fade, by which the fortunes of kingdoms rise and fall. The ancients believed that nothing in this world stood alone, that the path of the carp in the stream echoed the flight of a star, that the grief of a widow might stir the heart of a goddess, that a king's cruelty might call forth the judgment of the thunder god. Every sound, every shadow, every gesture of wind was a thread in the vast weaving of heaven and earth. And so we begin our journey under this jade sky, where chaos once roamed before the world was made, where gods once walked among the mountains, where dragons rose from the deep to speak with emperors, and where love, ambition, and sorrow have shaped the fates of both mortals and immortals. In the valleys farmers still bow toward the sunrise, their breath silver in the morning cold. In the cities, incense smoke still curls upward in shrines, feeding unseen altars. In the heavens above, the courts of the divine still watch, waiting for the moments when they must descend once more into the realm of men. Come then. The hour is early, and the mists are yet thick upon the slopes. Let us walk slowly, so that we do not disturb the resting cranes in the marshes. Let us follow the sound of the bell toward the temple gate, where a monk will greet us with tea fragrant as spring rain. Beyond it lies the path into legend, narrow, winding, and lit by the glow of distant lanterns. The stories you will hear are not merely of gods and monsters, of heroes and lovers, but of the breath that joins all things, of the invisible bridges between heaven and earth. Under the jade sky, the first tale waits. Before there were mountains, before there were rivers, before the first temple bell ever called across the mist, there was only Hundan, not a void, not an emptiness, but a boundless churning chaos, thick and formless as an endless night where no stars dared to shine. It had no up or down, no light or shadow, no breath of wind to stir it. In Hundan's depths time did not pass, for there was nothing yet to measure it against. It was neither still nor in motion, a dream before the dreamer. Yet within this roiling chaos, something began to gather, like the slow curling of a pearl inside an unseen shell. A single egg formed, vast beyond the scale of any creature, smooth as polished stone, holding within it all that would ever be. It floated in the depths of Hundan, its shell pulsing faintly with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Inside, light and darkness swirled together, pressing, folding, yearning for release. For 18,000 years it lay cradled by the nothingness, until one day, or what would one day be called a day, a tremor passed through the egg, and it split. From the cleft in its shell emerged Pangu, the first being, immense in stature, his body strong as mountains, yet newborn and unshaped. His eyes opened, and where his gaze fell, light spilled forth. He saw that within the egg, the clear, bright essence floated upward, and the heavy, dark essence sank downward, yet they tangled still, unable to part. And so, Pangu took up a mighty axe, forged of nothing but will, and the raw breath of the cosmos, and he struck. Each swing split the mingled essence, sending the lighter Qi upward to form heaven, and the heavier Qi downward to form earth. Yet as he swung, they sought to merge again, pulled by their ancient closeness. Pangu stood between them, bracing his vast arms and legs, pushing heaven higher, pressing earth firmer, so that their separation might hold. Each day, heaven rose another measure, and each day, Pangu grew taller to keep pace, his feet rooted in earth, his head brushing the vault above. For another 18,000 years he laboured thus, until heaven was high and vast, until earth was wide and steady. When at last the work was done, Pangu's strength ebbed. He laid down the axe, and the breath that had filled him began to disperse. Yet his ending was not loss, for his body was to become the world itself. His breath became the winds and the clouds that drift still across the skies. His voice became the thunder that rolls in the distance. His left eye became the sun, burning with unyielding light. His right eye became the moon, calm and cool. His hair became the stars scattered in the night, each a fragment of his thought. His flesh became the rich soil from which forests would rise. His bones hardened into the mountains, their peaks cutting the horizon. His blood flowed into rivers and seas, its tides carrying the memory of his pulse. His sweat became the dew that feeds the valleys. Even the fleas upon his skin were transformed, becoming the beasts that would roam the wild lands. And so the body of Pangu was unmade, yet remade in every hill and wave, in every breeze that stirs the grass. But the world, though born, was still silent. The mountains stood in their places, the seas filled their basins, the sun and moon walked their appointed paths. But there was no song yet in the valleys, no laughter in the meadows. Heaven and earth were sundered yet united, the pillars of creation holding firm, but the tapestry had yet to be woven with the colours of life. The old storytellers say that in those first dawns, the jade sky was pale and soft, its clouds moving like slow caravans over a land fresh with the scent of stone and rain. The rivers carved their courses without witness. The mountains cast their shadows over plains where no footsteps fell. Yet Pangu's spirit lingered in all things, like the last warmth of a fire after its embers fade. It waited, for hands to shape the clay, for voices to call across the water, for the first offerings to rise toward heaven. It is said that sometimes, in the deep hush before sunrise, you can feel the breath of Pangu still moving through the world, the cool breeze on your cheek, the ground firm under your feet, the stars trembling faintly before they yield to dawn. For though his body is gone, his labor endures. The separation of heaven and earth remains, and in that space, the stories of gods, dragons, and men will be told. Thus begins the age after chaos, when the world, newly born, stands open for the shaping. The clay waits for the touch of the divine, the rivers for the guiding of wise hands, the skies for the watch of heaven's court. In the silence that follows the death of the first being, creation's second breath is drawn, and the making of all things begins anew. In the stillness after Pangu's passing, heaven and earth lay in their places, yet the world felt incomplete. The mountains stood proud, the rivers flowed tirelessly, the sun and moon kept faithful watch, but no voice echoed in the valleys, no laughter stirred the air. The seas whispered to the shores, yet no one listened. The wind bent the grasses, yet no one wove them into shelter. It was a world rich in beauty, yet without eyes to see it. From the high realms descended Nüwa, the goddess with the body of a serpent and the face of a woman, her long hair black as the void before creation. Her gaze swept across this silent land, and in her heart she felt the weight of loneliness, not her own, but the loneliness of the earth itself. The rivers seemed to sigh as they wound through empty valleys. The mountains seemed to wait for footsteps to climb their slopes. The stars glittered above, but without voices below to marvel at them, their light felt unshared. Nüwa wandered for many days, her bare hands trailing through grass still damp with the first mists of the world. She dipped her fingers into the clay at the edges of the rivers and felt its softness yield beneath her touch. It was cool and pliable, like the promise of form. In that moment, she knew what must be done. She knelt by the riverbank and began to shape. With patient care, she formed the first human. She shaped the head round, the limbs slender yet strong, the chest deep enough to hold a breath, the hands delicate enough to hold another's. She smoothed the face and placed the eyes, so they might see the rivers and mountains, the sun and moon. When the figure was complete, she breathed upon it, and the clay shivered, warm color blooming in its skin. It blinked, looked up at her, and smiled, the first smile in the history of the world. Nüwa returned the smile, her heart filling with joy. One by one she shaped more of these beings. Each was slightly different, some taller, some with hair as dark as night, others with hair touched by the hue of autumn reeds. She gave them voices, so they could speak to each other and to the heavens. She gave them minds to wonder, hands to build, hearts to love. These first ones she shaped with the greatest care, each molded by her hands alone. They would be the leaders, the ones who could remember her touch most vividly, nobles who would guide their kin. Yet soon, Nüwa realized that the world was vast, and her two hands, though tireless, could not fill it quickly enough. She wished for countless more voices to join the chorus of life, to sing under the heavens, and fill the empty fields with work and play. And so she took a length of rope, dipped it in the rich clay of the river, and with a steady hand, she swung it in wide arcs. From every drop of clay that fell upon the earth, a human sprang to life, each one rising, stretching, blinking at the new sun. These were made swiftly, without the fine shaping of her hand, yet they were no less precious. They became the common folk, the countless ones who would till the fields, fish the rivers, and weave the songs of everyday life. The nobles and the commoners looked upon each other and knew themselves kin. They spoke to the rivers and to the wind. They lit fires beneath the stars. They carved tools from stone and bone. And as they lived, Nüwa walked among them, unseen but felt. She guided the rains to fall gently upon their crops, sent fish into their nets, and watched over their children as they played in the grass. Her presence was the warmth in the sunlight, the coolness of the evening breeze, the quiet reassurance that the world had a mother. For many years the people flourished. Villages rose, fields greened, and songs were sung at night by firelight. But one day, the sky darkened with a sound like the breaking of the world. A great calamity struck. The pillar that held up the heavens cracked, and the vault of the sky split open. From the sundered heavens poured storms and fire, floods and falling stars. Mountains crumbled, rivers burst their banks, and the cries of the people rose in terror. Nüwa saw her children in peril, and her heart burned with resolve. She searched the world for what might mend the sky. From the rivers, she drew stones of 5 colors: yellow, red, blue, white, and black, each shining with its own light. She placed them in the furnace of the earth's heart, melting them until they became a single shimmering mass. Then, with her own hands, she lifted the molten colors and pressed them into the rents in the heavens. The sky sizzled and steamed, but the cracks closed, and the chaos was bound once more. Still, The sky leaned, tilted by the damage. To steady it, Nüwa took the legs of the great turtle Ao, strong enough to bear the weight of eternity, and placed them at the four corners of the earth as pillars. She gathered the ashes of reeds to stem the floods, tamed the raging beasts that had escaped into the world, and calmed the seas until the waters lay quiet. Only when her people were safe did she return to the riverside, laying her hands once more into the clay, shaping new life to replace what had been lost. It is said that from then on, every human carries a trace of that first clay in their veins, the softness that shapes our kindness, the firmness that holds our will. The nobles still remember her careful touch. The commoners still carry the freedom of her swinging rope, and all remember the day their mother mended the sky with stones of 5 colors. And so the world was no longer silent. The mountains had laughter in their valleys, the rivers carried songs, and the heavens looked down not on emptiness, but on the countless, breathing, living faces of humanity. The loneliness of earth had ended, and the great weaving of life had truly begun. In the age after Nüwa shaped humankind, the world was full of life. Villages stirred by the sound of children, fields golden with harvest, rivers dotted with fishermen's boats. Yet though the people lived, they did not yet know the deeper patterns of living. They had hands but no craft. They had eyes but no reading of the sky. They loved but did not yet bind love into families that would endure. The world was still wild in its ways, and the people, though clever, wandered like seedlings without a gardener. It was then that Fuxi appeared. Some say he was Nüwa's brother, others her companion, still others that he rose from the mists as the earth's answer to her work. Like Nüwa, he bore the body of a serpent from the waist down, his coils strong and graceful. His upper form was that of a man, broad-shouldered, his face calm, his eyes deep as still water. He carried no weapon, for his purpose was not to conquer, but to teach. Wherever he walked, people paused, sensing in him an authority older than any village elder, a quiet knowledge that seemed to breathe with the wind and flow with the rivers. Fuxi traveled from valley to valley, speaking with those who lived by the rivers and in the shadow of the hills. He watched them snare birds clumsily with bare hands and spear fish by chance more than skill. He saw that in lean seasons hunger visited too many households, and so by the shore of a great lake he gathered the people and showed them how to weave the first fishing nets. From reeds and hemp they plaited long ropes, knotting them into meshes fine enough to hold fish, yet wide enough to let the water pass. He showed them how to cast the net in a wide arc, so it sank like a drifting cloud, then draw it in slowly, gathering the silver bodies of the lake's gifts. Soon the people no longer feared the hunger of winter, for the waters became their steady table. Yet fishing alone was not enough. In the highlands, game moved swift and wary, evading the hunters' crude efforts. Fuxi showed them how to fashion the first bows, bending branches supple yet strong, and how to string them with sinew that hummed like a plucked harp. He taught them to fletch arrows, their shafts straight as the sun's path, their tips hardened in fire. He taught them patience, to move with the wind, to read the tracks in soil and snow. With these skills, hunting became not an act of desperation, but a craft of respect, taking what was needed and honoring the spirit of the animal with offerings of smoke. As the people grew in skill, Fuxi saw that they still lacked harmony among themselves. Quarrels arose over who belonged to whom, over children whose parentage was disputed, over alliances between villages. And so beneath a great cedar, whose roots gripped the earth like an elder's hand. He gathered the clans and taught them the custom of marriage. He showed them how to bind two lives in a union witnessed by their kin and by heaven, that their children might grow in the shelter of peace. The people danced that night under the stars, weaving flowers into each other's hair, and in the years to come, the memory of those first unions grew into the rhythms of family life. The hearth, the shared field, the long watching over one another through winter's long sleep. But Fuxi's greatest gift was not of the hands, nor even of the heart. It was of the mind's eye, the power to read the balance of heaven and earth. For he knew that to live well, one must not only act, but understand. He studied the patterns of clouds and the flight of cranes, the curling of river eddies and the cracks in drying mud. From these, he discerned the eternal dance between yin and yang, the dark and the light, the yielding and the firm, the moon and the sun. He set these truths into 8 sacred trigrams, the Bagua, each made of lines broken or unbroken, each a symbol of a cosmic principle: heaven, earth, thunder, wind, water, fire, mountain and lake. To each trigram he gave meaning, and to the people he gave the art of reading them. With the Bagua, they could understand the cycles of the seasons, the tides of fortune, the unseen currents that shaped their lives. A farmer could choose the right day to plant. A traveller could choose the right time to depart. A ruler could judge the moment to act or to wait. It was not magic, but a language, the language of the universe itself, written in strokes of heaven's own hand. In the evenings, Fuxi would sit with the elders beside the fire and draw the trigrams in the dust with a stick, explaining their secrets. Children would watch wide-eyed, tracing the shapes in the air. Fishermen would listen and remember, their minds already on the moon's pull over the tides. Hunters would think of the changing winds and the migrations of deer. Slowly, the world became not only a place to survive, but a pattern to be understood and lived within. It is said that when Fuxi had taught all he could, he returned to the place where earth meets the sky, his serpent's tail vanishing into the mists. Some say he joined Nüwa in the celestial realms, their work complete. Others that he still wanders in disguise, testing the wisdom of those who claim to understand the balance he revealed. Even now, the Bagua marks the doors of homes and temples, its lines guarding and guiding. Nets still fall into rivers in the way he showed. Bows still sing when hunters loose them at the turning of the year. And when two people stand together before their families to vow their lives to each other, it is Fuxi's shadow that stands with them, serene, enduring and wise. In the time after Fuxi had given humankind the tools of life and the wisdom to live in harmony with the world, the earth was a place of both beauty and peril. Villages thrived in the valleys, fields ripened beneath the sun, and families grew under roofs of thatch and tile. Yet beyond the borders of ploughed soil and temple bells lay wild lands where shadows moved of their own accord, where rivers could rise in a night to swallow a town, and where demon kings ruled hidden kingdoms in the folds of mountains and the depths of seas. In such a world, a child was born to a humble farming family in the northern hills. His parents were poor in silver, but rich in patience, and they raised him among the terraces and streams, teaching him to work the land, to bow to the rising sun, and to listen for the language of wind and water. He was quiet, not out of shyness, but because he seemed always to be watching, the arc of a hawk's flight, the slow carving of a riverbank, the way an old pine bent, but did not break before winter storms. From an early age, he showed a mind that could hold both kindness and resolve. When other children quarreled, he would step between them, not with anger, but with calm words that seemed to leave no room for further fighting. When the old or sick needed help in the fields, he would carry their burdens without being asked. The elders whispered that the boy seemed touched by heaven, though he himself thought only of working hard and serving his family. When he was still young, calamity struck. From the west came a demon king, vast and cruel, whose breath was a stench of smoke, and whose shadow was said to wither crops. His army of twisted beasts fell upon the farmlands, burning fields, taking captives, and leaving only ash in their wake. The boys' village lay directly in their path. That night, as the flames of other settlements lit the horizon, the boy's father placed his rough hands on his son's shoulders and told him to run to the hills. The boy refused. Instead, he took up the only weapon he knew, a wooden staff used for herding cattle, and went to stand with the men who would guard the village's gate. The battle that followed should have ended swiftly, for the Demon King's forces were many, and the villagers few. Yet something in the boy's presence seemed to harden the courage of those around him. They fought as if they had nothing left to lose, and though they were driven back, they held long enough for the women and children to flee into the mountains. When the Demon King finally withdrew, leaving the village smouldering, the boy, now bloodied and exhausted, swore an oath. He would not live in a world where such cruelty went unanswered. From that day forward, he sought knowledge beyond the fields. He journeyed to wandering hermits in the forests, learning the ways of meditation and the flow of Qi through the body. He visited mountain forges to watch blacksmiths shape metal, learning how to read the heat in the color of steel. He traveled along riverbanks to fishermen who could read the pull of the tide in the tremor of a net's rope. Every lesson he gathered, he wove into himself. In his 20th year, he returned to the ruined western lands to challenge the Demon King, who had laid waste to his home. The king, amused by the mortal's boldness, agreed to face him in single combat. For 7 days and 7 nights they fought, in the air, across cliffs, through forests blackened by the demon's own breath. The boy's body broke and healed again, each time more quickly, for his spirit burned with a light the demon could not quench. On the dawn of the 8th day, he struck the Demon King with a final blow, driving him into the earth, where the mountains themselves closed over him. The people of the western lands hailed him as a savior, but he refused to take their offerings of gold or crown. "I fight," he said, "not for reward, but for the peace all should know." Yet news of his deeds spread far, and it was not long before other demon kings, proud and jealous, rose to test him. He faced a serpent whose coils could crush a temple wall, an ogre who wore armor of jagged stone, a witch whose voice could turn a man's heart against itself. Each time, he prevailed, not through brute force alone, but through strategy, patience, and an unshakable sense of justice. He gathered companions along the way. A swordswoman who could split a falling leaf in two without touching the stem, a healer who carried the fragrance of plum blossoms, a wandering scholar whose knowledge of the stars guided them through darkest nights. Together, they traveled the breadth of the human world, rooting out cruelty wherever it hid. But the mortal realm was only half the battlefield. For the demon kings, it was said, had alliances with beings in the shadowed corridors of heaven itself, spirits of ambition and discord who sought to unseat the order set since the days of Pangu and Nüwa. And so, when the last of his great earthly foes was cast down, the hero was summoned in a dream by the guardians at the gates of heaven. They told him that the balance of the celestial realm was faltering, and that only one who had proven both strength and compassion could set it right. Passing into the heavenly realm, he found not the peace he had imagined, but a court as troubled as any mortal kingdom. Factions whispering in the halls, minor gods bickering over domains, celestial generals too proud to act in concert. Beyond the silver gates, the demon legions gathered in the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. The hero, still clothed in mortal form, walked among these gods without bowing or boasting. He spoke plainly, judged fairly, and fought fiercely where fighting was needed. In the greatest of these battles, he led the armies of heaven against the demon king of the black wind, whose wings could blot out the sun. The fighting lasted for moons, and the sky itself seemed to shudder with each clash. At the height of the struggle, when the demons breached the lower gates, the hero drove into their ranks alone, his spear a line of light against the storm. When the Black Wind King fell, the enemy host broke and fled, scattering into the void between worlds. When the dust of that war settled, the gods themselves knelt before him. They placed upon his brow a crown of purest jade, said to have been carved from the first stone born in Pangu's world. In that moment, the mortal became something more, the ruler of heaven, the supreme arbiter of divine law, the one to whom all gods, dragons, and spirits would answer, the Jade Emperor. Under his reign, heaven was not left to drift in chaos. He built a celestial bureaucracy mirroring the empire below, departments to govern rain and harvest, courts to judge mortal souls, ministries to oversee rivers, mountains, and stars. Every god and spirit had a place, every task a keeper. Order spread outward from heaven like the ripples of a pebble cast into still water, touching even the farthest mortal villages. Yet the Jade Emperor never forgot the fields where he had grown up, nor the people whose faces had once looked to him for protection. It is said that sometimes, in the guise of a wandering elder, he still walks the earth, pausing to speak with a farmer about the weather, to give a child a word of comfort, to watch over the gates of a humble village when shadows move in the hills. For though he sits upon the throne of heaven, his heart still remembers the soil from which it rose. When the Jade Emperor took the throne of heaven, the celestial realm breathed a sigh of relief. The courts no longer echoed with petty disputes, and the ministries began to hum with quiet order. Yet he knew peace in heaven could not endure unless the borders of all realms were guarded. The mortal world lay exposed to the whims of demon kings and rogue spirits. The oceans could birth tempests without warning, and the gates of heaven itself were vulnerable to forces that prowled beyond the stars. To protect creation's fragile balance, the Jade Emperor decreed that 4 great guardians would be appointed, one for each quarter of the world, their watch stretching from the deepest ocean to the farthest desert, from the peaks of heaven to the underworld's gates. These were the Sida Tianwang, the 4 heavenly kings. They would stand as the first and last defense against chaos, each ruling a cardinal direction, each embodying a virtue, each bearing the strength to challenge any threat that dared to cross heaven's boundaries. Of the 4, the first to take his place was the guardian of the rising sun, the Eastern King, Jiguo Tianwang, the king who sees the growth of the world. In the halls of heaven, he was robed in green, the color of bamboo leaves after rain, of young shoots breaking the soil in spring. His domain was the renewal of life, the turning of seasons toward abundance, the breath of dawn that wakes the fields. But to mistake this gentleness for weakness was to invite ruin, for his watchful eyes missed nothing, and his arms could strike with the swiftness of a hawk on the wing. In his right hand he bore the great pipa, a lute of polished wood strung with threads of light. To mortal eyes, It might seem only an instrument for music, yet in the Eastern King's grasp, its notes were weapons and blessings alike. When his fingers danced upon the strings in harmony, the sound could calm the fury of storms, coax the clouds into gentle rain, and lead lost sailors to safe harbor. But when he struck the chords in anger, the strings cried out like 1,000 thunderclaps, and their vibrations could shake the very bones of a demon army, driving them into the sea. The Eastern King's mount was a dragon horse with scales of deep emerald and a mane that shimmered gold in sunlight. It could gallop across the waves as easily as through the air, carrying its master from the Jade Emperor's court to the farthest edge of the eastern seas in a single day. Wherever the dragon horse's hooves struck the water, lotus flowers bloomed in its wake, a sign to mortals that the guardian had passed, and that their shores were safe from the monstrous things that lurked in the ocean depths. His watch stretched from the coral palaces of the Dragon King of the East Sea to the cloud-wrapped forests of the farthest islands, where the cries of unseen birds echo like temple bells. He knew every current, every tide, every shifting sandbar. Sailors would offer cups of rice wine to the waves before departure, calling on his name to smooth their journey. Fishermen would set a green ribbon in the rigging to honor him, trusting that his gaze would turn aside the gales that might smash their boats against the rocks. Yet his guardianship was not only of seas and winds. The Eastern King was the first to sense when a demon's ambition stirred in the dark places of the world. Once, a serpent spirit of vast size rose from the deep and began to coil itself around the coasts, demanding tribute from the villages it shadowed. The Eastern King descended in a column of jade light, his piper ringing in the air like 100 bronze gongs. The serpent's coils tightened in defiance, but with each pluck of the strings, the sound rippled through the waters, unraveling its strength. The villagers say that after 3 songs, the serpent unraveled into mist, and its shadow never darkened their shores again. In the courts of heaven, he was known for his unshakable vigilance. His eyes, dark and steady, were said to see not only the horizon, but the hearts of those who approached the gates. A spirit carrying false words could not stand under his gaze. A demon cloaked in illusion would find its disguise stripped away in an instant. He was the Jade Emperor's assurance that the eastern skies would never open to chaos without warning. And yet, there were moments when his duties called for more than strength. In the years of the great drought, when even the eastern rivers ran thin, the Eastern King laid aside his armor and came to the mortal world in the form of a wandering musician. He played his pipa in the marketplaces of thirsty towns, the sound carrying on the wind to the high places where the rain clouds hid. Moved by the music, the clouds gathered and the rains fell. The people, not knowing who he truly was, offered him bread and shelter. He accepted, smiling quietly, then vanished before the dawn, his dragon horse's hoofprints the only sign he had been there at all. Thus the east was guarded by the sound of strings that could both soothe and shatter, by the eyes that missed no threat, by the strength of one who rode the wind as easily as he walked the halls of heaven. And while the other 3 kings held their own realms in equal vigilance, it was said that the Eastern King's music could be heard by them all, a low, steady chord reminding them that they stood together in service of heaven's peace. To the south stood Zhenjiang Tianwang, the king who causes growth. His watch over lands where summer's heat reigns and the air hums with life. Clad in crimson armor that caught the light like embers, he embodied vigor and expansion, not the gentle renewal of spring, but the relentless surge of midsummer, when every root and branch strives to claim the sun. His very presence was said to thicken the air, as if the world itself drew a deeper breath in his company. The Southern King carried not a musical instrument, but a weapon of command. A long, gleaming sword known as the Blade of Southern Flame. Forged in the heart of a star, it glowed faintly even in darkness, its edge fine enough to split a falling raindrop. In times of peace, the sword rested in its scabbard, its warmth encouraging the growth of crops, the ripening of fruits, the swelling of rivers under summer rains. In times of war, it burned with such heat that no demon's armor could withstand it, each stroke leaving arcs of fire that lit the battlefield. His companion and mount was a great bird, the vermilion peacock, whose feathers blazed with hues of scarlet and gold. When it took flight, its wings could spread a canopy of shimmering heat across the sky, drying the mists that clung to mountain passes or scattering the monsoon's fierce storms. Mortals took its sudden appearance as a sign. Traders would delay their caravans, farmers would bring in the harvest, for the Southern King's flight always heralded a change in the season's heart. His realm included the vast jungles, fertile river deltas, and the deserts where heat could make the air dance like liquid. He knew each in its own way. The jungles for their hidden threats and hidden cures, the deltas for their constant shift between bounty and flood, the deserts for the cruel spirits that sought to claim the unwary. His watch was as much about keeping the balance as it was about holding the line. Too much growth could choke itself. Too much rain could drown what it sought to nourish. One tale tells of a summer when a horde of locust demons rose from the southern sands, blackening the sky as they devoured field after field. The Southern King descended with his vermilion peacock, the great bird's wings scattering waves of heat so intense that the swarm faltered. With his sword, he traced a circle of flame around the threatened villages, a barrier no locust could cross without turning to ash. For 7 days he held the line until the swarm, weakened and leaderless, scattered back to the sands. Among the 4 kings, he was known as the most direct. Where the Eastern King might weave subtlety into his actions, the Southern King struck swiftly and without hesitation. Yet his rule was not without compassion. After each battle he would walk the fields, helping mortals replant what had been destroyed, his sword still sheathed, its heat coaxing seeds to sprout. Those who met him in these quiet hours spoke of a voice like the low roar of a hearth fire, steady and warm. Thus the South stood under his guard, a realm of fierce summers, bold colours, and unflinching defence. In the Council of the Four, his was the voice that urged action before trouble could take root, the blade that struck while others still weighed their counsel. And so long as the vermilion peacock's shadow crossed the southern lands, no demon nor ill wind could claim dominion there. In the direction of the setting sun stood Guangmu Tianwang, the king who sees all. Where the Eastern King's gaze was keen and the Southern King's presence commanding, the Western King's watch was patient and unblinking, like the long light of evening that lingers before night fully claims the sky. His armour was the deep gold of ripened grain and autumn leaves, and in his hands he bore not sword or lute, but a slender gleaming halberd tipped with a crescent blade. The halberd was called the Crescent Watcher, and it was more than a weapon. It was a key to every lock truth. When the Western King struck the ground with its butt, lies crumbled like dust, and when he levelled the blade at an enemy, no illusion could withstand its point. This power made him heaven's chief sentinel, the one who could pierce through the disguises of spirits, who wandered too far into mortal lands, or detect the faintest ripple in the barriers that kept the underworld sealed. His mount was not a creature of fire or wind, but a great white tiger with eyes like molten bronze. Silent as snowfall, it could cross mountains without leaving a trail, and yet when the Western King willed it, Its roar could shake the sky from horizon to horizon. To mortals, the sight of the white tiger upon a ridge at dusk was both a warning and a blessing, a sign that danger had been seen and would not be allowed to pass. The Western King's domain encompassed arid plains, mountain passes, and the borders where mortal lands brushed against realms no map could chart. Many threats in the west came not in the form of raging armies, but in slow-moving plots. Demons disguised as wandering monks, spirits whispering poison into the ears of rulers, shadows that slipped through dreams. Against these, the Western King's vigilance was tireless. One tale tells of a kingdom whose ruler fell under the sway of a spirit wearing the guise of a trusted advisor. The Western King, passing through unseen, sensed the wrongness in the air, a stillness that did not belong. He entered the palace in the form of a weary traveler and asked to play a game of weiqi with the ruler. As they played, each stone he placed on the board shimmered faintly, until the spirit's disguise unraveled and its form was revealed. With a single sweep of the crescent watcher, he banished it back to the shadow realm from which it came. Among the four kings, his counsel was often the last to be given, for he would not speak until he had considered every angle, every hidden thread in a matter. But when he did speak, the others listened. For the Western King's words, like his strikes, were few, and none were wasted. Thus the West was kept safe, its roads watched, its rulers guarded from deceit, its borders shielded from unseen advance. And when the sun dipped low and the land glowed with the gold of his armor, mortals knew their guardian's eyes were still upon them, sharp and unwavering. In the land of cold winds and long nights stood Duo and Tianwang, the king who hears all. Where the Eastern King brought renewal, the Southern King brought vigor, and the Western King brought vigilance, the Northern King embodied endurance. His armor was the deep blue of a winter sea, inlaid with silver patterns that caught the light like frost on pine branches. His eyes were calm and dark, the kind that weighed a threat without haste, for he knew that in the north, survival belonged to those who could withstand more than they could strike. In his hands he bore a great parasol of jeweled cloth, its canopy wide as a ship's sail. It was no mere ornament. When opened, it could shield entire armies from snow and sleet, scatter storms, and repel curses flung from the hands of hostile spirits. In times of peace, the parasol cast a steady, protective shade over those who travelled under his guard. In times of battle, its unfurled span blazed with a light like winter's noonday sun, banishing creatures of darkness that prowled the edges of the mortal realm. His companion was a black qilin, its scales glinting like ice under starlight, its breath curling white in the cold air. This was no swift flyer or blazing charger. The qilin moved with deliberate steps, each one steady enough to carry its rider across frozen rivers or through blizzards without faltering. When its hooves struck the ground, the snow beneath compacted into paths that would not melt until the journey was complete, ensuring safe passage for any mortal under the Northern King's protection. His domain was the harsh expanse, the mountain ranges where the wind could flay exposed skin, the tundras where the horizon seemed to have no end, the northern seas whose ice could crush ships like eggshells. These lands were not merely dangerous for their cold, but for the things that hid within it. Frost demons that rode storms, wraiths that lured travelers with phantom lights, spirits that fed on the despair of the lost. The Northern King's ears could hear them from leagues away, the scrape of claw on ice, the faintest whisper of malice in the wind, and he would move to intercept before they could draw near. One winter, a pack of ice wolves descended from the far north, their breath freezing the very air in their path. The northern king rode out alone, the jeweled parasol closed at his side. As the wolves circled, their howls twisting through the dark, he listened, truly listened, until he could pick out the voice of their leader in the din. When the alpha lunged, he opened the parasol, and from its canopy poured a brilliance that shattered the pack's courage. The wolves fled into the storm, and the snows closed over their tracks. In the councils of the four heavenly kings, the northern king often spoke with the weight of caution, urging preparation before any campaign. His was the hand that strengthened walls before an attack came, the voice that counseled patience in the face of provocation, for he knew that chaos, like winter, often arrived slowly, but once it settled in, it could hold a land in its grip for years. Thus the north remained secure beneath his watch, the cold winds tamed, the darkness kept beyond the borders. And when travellers on lonely winter roads looked up to see a broad shadow cast over them, not from cloud or mountain, but from a vast parasol moving silently through the snow, they knew they walked in the presence of their guardian. And so the four stood at the edges of creation, east, south, west, and north, each a pillar holding the world against the press of chaos. Their realms were different, their virtues distinct, yet their purpose was one: to keep safe the balance the Jade Emperor had sworn to protect. From the highest heaven to the farthest shore, their watch endures. And so long as the four heavenly kings hold their stations, the gates of all realms remain secure. Beneath the moving skin of the oceans, below the white comb of waves and the long green sway of kelp, stand courts as old as any mountain temple. There, in palaces ribbed with coral and floored with mother of pearl, the dragon kings hold dominion. They are not beasts to be hunted, nor nightmares from a fisherman's tale. They are rulers, ancient lords of water and weather, whose signatures are written in cloud, whose decrees are carried by tides, whose attendants are the rain itself. When the Jade Emperor set heaven in order, he confirmed their thrones over the four seas, east, south, west, and north. And from those thrones they govern storms, negotiate the height of rivers, and keep the moon's pull honest. To the east stretches the brightest court, where lamps of nacre burn with steady light and banners woven of sea silk drift in currents like slow banners in a mountain breeze. The Eastern Dragon King presides with a calm that belies the power sleeping in his coils. At his word, winds stiffen or soften. At his gesture, the ocean lifts its chest or settles. Sailors setting out from estuaries knot green cords to their masts and whisper a respectful greeting toward the dawn. If they return with holds heavy and decks unbroken, they will pour rice wine into the surf in thanks, for they know the current does not turn kindly by chance. Southward, where waters ripen warm and quick, the southern Dragon King holds court among forests of red coral. His halls ring with the clack of crab armor and the soft drift of seagrass curtains. Here edicts concern monsoon and river mouth, mangrove and delta. He decides when storms should arrive strong enough to feed paddies, but not strong enough to flatten them. His scribes, eel-slick and tireless, record rainfall in long, shimmering ledgers, so that mountain snows and sea winds speak in a single account. Fisher villages along those coasts mark his festivals with drums wrapped tight against the humid night, and lanterns that float upriver like migrating stars. In the west, beyond chains of islands and long sandbars, the Western Dragon King sits in a palace built where cold currents meet warm. His court is patient and exacting. He oversees trade routes that braid between reefs and holds counsel with pearl divers who know distances by the burn in their lungs. Merchants acknowledge his temper by timing their voyages to his schedule. A ship that defies him will find a blank horizon and a wind that circles back to where it began. It is said he prefers negotiations at a low voice and keeps a shelf of jade markers representing harbours. When one falls from its place, a port learns humility. To the north, the sea is steel in winter and glass in summer. Here the northern dragon king reigns from caverns cut into black stone, lanterns blazing like small suns. Ice remembers his footsteps. He commands pack floes to part or press, instructs sleet to stay aloft or descend, and guides whales along highways only he can see. Fishers in sealskin coats hang charms of pale bone on their gunnels, knowing that a sudden hush across the water means the king has turned his ear their way. Where rivers meet his sea, he confers with spirits of frost, deciding which mouths may freeze and which must remain open for the sake of villages hidden inland. Dragons rule by covenant. Their law is not the iron of a fortress wall, but the measured weight of rain and the rhythm of tides. A good season is a properly kept promise. A cyclone that shreds roofs is a contract broken, sometimes by mortals, sometimes by brighter courts above, sometimes by the dragons themselves when pride outruns prudence. For this reason, mortals plead, bargain and make offerings, not to appease a hunger, but to join a schedule. They come to the water's edge at night, hands warm with incense, and speak as one speaks to magistrates, clearly, humbly, with reasons and dates. There was a summer when the estuaries of the east thinned to threads, and rice seedlings yellowed like burnt paper. The county magistrate, a practical man who kept accounts with tidy brush strokes, walked to the tide line and set down a case as though opening a court. He listed his people's needs, the granaries count, the days since last rain. He promised repair of a neglected shrine and fairer tax on the boats that used the tidal channels. He sealed the petition with his own official stamp and set it afloat in a carved cedar box. 3 nights later, clouds gathered with the steadiness of a careful clerk. The rain arrived in sheets that did not uproot the crop. In the morning, the cedar box washed ashore. The petition returned with a mark in blue ink. Approved. Not all bargains ask for gifts. Sometimes they offer restraint. In a bustling port to the south, merchants widened quays and dredged a channel deeper than the old stones allowed. They boasted that they had corrected the sea's own design. The southern dragon king listened, then plucked from his ledgers a single ribbon of tide and knotted it short. The harbour silted in a week. Barges sat like stranded turtles, and profit turned to stubborn mud. A monk walked the slips, asking for silence at the water's edge. When the town bowed and promised to return a bend to the river they had straightened, the knot in the king's hand loosened, and the channel breathed again. Storms are the dragon king's cavalry. A tempest is not mere fury, it is a deliberate movement. Wings turning, ranks wheeling, banners of rain proving a point. When a mountain lord dammed a river to fill his private lake, the Western Dragon King did not send thunder at once. He let fog sit in the gorge, week after quiet week, until the Lord convinced himself that he had mastered water. Then came a single night with a low, unending growl, and the gorge spoke. The lake wall folded like paper, and the river galloped home, carrying off the Lord's vanity in a long procession of timbers. In its place, reeds reappeared, and fish nosed along banks they remembered. There are stories of smaller bargains too, personal and precise. A fisherman's daughter once stood on a jetty of the northern coast, clutching a red scarf in fingers gone numb with cold. Her father had not returned, and the horizon sat blank as stone. She did not cry to the sky. She spoke to the water, telling it the scent of her father's tobacco, the shape of his oar calluses, the way he hummed when the net ran right. Somewhere under the ice-lit swells, an attendant heard the exactness of a love that could be filed and answered. A long swell rolled in, no wind, no foam, carrying a skiff half full of silence, and a man who coughed once, twice, then laughed as if returning from a far room. In the Eastern Sea, a poet prosecuted a different case. The governor had hoarded rain in terraced ponds for his private gardens, while villages downstream cracked under drought. The poet composed a suite of verses that described empty jars, sleeping wells, and roofs so clean from lack of weather that dust lay untroubled upon them. He read the poems at the old sea gate, where barnacles had outlived 3 dynasties. The tide climbed the steps like a listener. That night the governor's ponds found themselves restless. Their contained waters itched and fled their banks, slipping down the carved channels and out to fields that had waited, bowls long held out. The poet's name was forgotten. The irrigation ditches kept his meter. The courts themselves are wondrous and orderly. Audiences begin with a hush like the still moment before a wave turns. Heralds in scale-bright vests announce the matters of the day. River disputes, requests for a delayed storm, complaints about illegal nets, petitions for safe passage of migrating turtles. The dragon kings listen, heads lifted, whiskers moving as if tasting the currents of argument. Verdicts are spoken as weather. 2 days of soft rain across the Third Valley. A wind from the northwest to push the red-sailed fleet home. A one-span rise in spring tide, but no more. Clerks record each decision on translucent panels that ripple as they dry, then shelve them in racks where jellyfish drift like lazy lamps. From time to time, the heavens and the seas must renegotiate their border. An eclipse, a comet, a festival miscounted. Such things send confused signals through calendars, and weather takes offense. In those moments, envoys cross realms. Star-reading officials from the Jade Emperor's palace descend on steps of cloud, and high stewards of the 4 seas rise through a spiral corridor of light. They meet above headlands, where cliff swallows paint the air. Agreements are measured in breaths. A misaligned monsoon is slid a week forward. A river's mouth is allowed a new bar for a single season. The world nods and continues. Yet dragons can err. Pride curls as easily as smoke. A western sea prince once wagered he could steer a typhoon through a maze of islands without disturbing a single rice shock. He failed. Villages woke to flattened paddies and boats stacked in puzzling heaps far ashore. The prince presented himself at the nearest shrine with lowered head. He repaired keys with his own coils, dragged silt from wells with his own whiskers, and placed a ring of polished shell at each household's door. When the next storm season came, a wide lane of quiet air opened through the heart of the winds, so broad that children walked out to watch the trees bow on either side while their own lanterns did not flicker. Mortals who bargain poorly learn quickly. There was a man who promised 10,000 paper fish if his fleet returned rich. The catch came in like a silver curtain. He kept 9,900 of his promise. The missing 100 weighed more than anchors. All year his boats found only sea as smooth as painted lacquer, pretty, useless. In the end, he and his brothers spent 3 nights cutting and folding by candlelight, fingers aching, breath fogging the window. They launched the missing fish upon a rising tide, and the following dawn, a working wind returned, tasting of salt and forgiveness. The Dragon Kings do not despise courage, they despise arrogance. When a youth at a western pier declared the sea his to master, the tide lifted, then declined to return for half a day, leaving boats tilted like scolded dogs. The elders sent the youth to dig channels by hand until his shoulders shook. When the water crept back, one ripple at a time, the youth bowed to it as to an elder. He learned the names of the sandbars the way one learns the names of aunt and uncle, and in later years he taught new hands to speak softly at the water's edge before they threw their lines. On festival nights, human and dragon calendars touch. Lanterns are set afloat on rivers that eventually find the sea, and the sea answers with a tide that arrives a little early, as if eager to meet its guests. Children lean out over railings to spot seahorses wearing copper bells, shrimp soldiers marching in precise ranks, and the shadow of a long body far below, like a hill rolling under silk. The four seas breathe together then, a single deep inhalation that carries the scent of rain upriver and the scent of rice and smoke out to the horizon. When the dragon kings are angered, the world knows. Roof tiles rattle in their frames, gulls fly inland, and even gamblers at dockside tables pause mid-throw. But anger is not their favorite instrument. Their truest strength is proportion. Too much tide and cliffs collapse. Too little and harbors choke. Too much rain and grain rots. Too little and dust owns the fields. They keep the needle centered. Their advisors, pufferfish stewards, turtle judges, octopus cartographers, are chosen for patience, and their courts reward exact promises, spoken without flourish. As rulers, the dragon kings accept tribute not for their bellies, but for their ledgers. Offerings are receipts, shells stacked to represent new breakwaters, carved floats acknowledging sanctuaries where nets will never be cast. A poem stamped with the seal of a prefect agreeing to leave one bend of river wild. In exchange, storms travel with manners, and rain learns the difference between mercy and indulgence. So the balance holds, humans on shore, dragons beneath, each watching the other as neighbors whose fences meet at the river. If you stand on a pier before dawn and listen, truly listen, you may hear a rhythm beneath the slap of water on pilings, a steady, far heartbeat. It is the four seas speaking to one another, trading weather like letters, confirming tomorrow's tide, sharing rumors of a whirlpool that needs taming, or a reef that requires rest. They are rulers, yes, but rulers who prefer the pen to the cudgel, the chart to the shout. And when rain begins to bead on your sleeve, fine and polite, you may take it as an answered petition. The dragon kings have read your need, and this once agreed. The year the rivers forgot their banks, the world sounded different. The earth did not ring with hoof and foot, but sighed under weight. Villages became islands of roof tile and smoke. Drums meant for festivals were turned into boats by desperate hands. Where paths had been, there were only brown mirrors rippling with the reflection of a grey sky. It was said the flood had no face, only 1,000 voices. Door lintels creaking, rafters groaning, trees letting go their roots in the night. In that age, people tied jars of grain to rafters like prayers and slept with ropes around their waists, so they might be pulled from the water if the house woke floating. Before that deluge, a man named Gun had tried to master the waters with walls. He heaped earth upon earth, raising dikes as if height alone could command obedience. The rivers answered him with laughter none heard, only felt, pressing patiently, seeping at first, then shouldering aside his works as oxen push down reeds. When the embankments failed, they failed everywhere, and the ruin wore Gun's name like a soaked mantle. He vanished into stories, leaving behind a son who looked on the same waters and did not see an enemy to pen, but a nation to guide. Yu would later be called great, but at the beginning he had only a traveller's staff, the map of his land sketched in mud, and a promise he made with both palms pressed to wet earth. I will open ways for you. He walked where boats drifted over courtyards, where ancestral tablets bobbed like dark fish. He marked where currents tugged hard and where they stalled, listened to the speech of eddies the way a doctor listens to breath. In his mind a lattice formed, rivers to tributaries, tributaries to streams, all lines that must be combed and led, not fenced and punished. The flood was not a beast to be beaten into a pen. It was a creature that would follow a path if shown one. On a dawn, the colour of ash, Yu stood upon a ridge of stone that jutted from a drowned hillside and raised his eyes to the cloud-hung east. There he saw a shadow turning within cloud, as a bird turns in its egg, a long body armoured in scales, two vast wings that rippled like banners, whiskers trailing sparks of rain. The dragon's descent did not split the sky, it stitched it. And when he came to earth, the wind smelled suddenly of new riverbanks and the cool under-smell of clay. "I am Yinglong," said the winged dragon, voice low and endless as a confluence. "I have watched men dam and be undone. You would carve." Yu bowed. "Yes, the sea waits for 1,000 roads it never received." Yinglong lowered his head until one luminous eye filled Yu's world. "Then give me your lines." Yu opened his mud map, and the dragon exhaled. The breath lifted the drawn channels and set them shimmering in air. A web of light stretched from mountains to coast. "Good," Yinglong murmured. "You have listened to the land." He unfurled his wings, and where a single scale broke loose and fell, it struck with the weight of a boulder and became a marker stone. From that day the man and the dragon travelled together, one to decide, one to make room for decision. They began in the high places where snow became the first syllable of every river's name. There, mountain ribs resisted with a stubbornness older than language. Yu set men and women to hew channels with bronze and bone, and Yinglong pressed his body along the ridge tops, his colossal weight persuading stone to yield a hand's breadth, a forearm, a cart's width. Where cliffs refused, the dragon's talons scored them with deep, clean cuts, and Yu's crews wedged timbers, pried and sang in rhythm, until the mountains gave up their narrow gates. Water that had once hurled itself blindly downward now found a new grammar. Turn here, split there, braid and unbraid, descend in steps instead of avalanches. As they moved downslope, the work changed from carving to combing. Silt had filled valleys like sleep fills the body after grief. Heavy, complete. Yu learned to love the slow labour of dredging, the scrape and lift, the patient placing of spoil upon new banks that would not soon be asked to hold back everything at once. Yinglong flew low, his wing beats steady as a heartbeat. Each downward stroke pressed a long groove into the flooded plain. Each upward stroke lifted a ribbon of water and set it flowing toward a new cut course. When men faltered, the dragon's shadow passing over them felt like a hand upon the back, saying, "Continue." There are tales of single days that changed provinces. At the tumbling gorge, the water punched itself to froth against a neck of rock. Yu stood in spray until his clothes clung like a second skin, then traced with his staff a curve along the gorge wall. Not straight. If we bid it bend, it will spend itself in turning. Yinglong coiled, brought his horned brow against the rock and pushed. Stone groaned. The air filled with the smell of broken rain. When the wall yielded, it did so with reluctant dignity, and the river, given a sweeping corridor, lowered its shoulders and followed. The foam smoothed. Downstream, 4 villagers stepped out of their upper stories and found ground again. In the marshlands, the work required delicacy. Whole forests had drowned, tree crowns stuck from the water like the fingers of a giant trying to remember the land. Yu walked the margins, speaking the names of reeds and birds, learning how an inch of depth meant life here and death there. Yinglong tasted the currents with his whiskers and hummed a tone that drew fish into the channels you wished to keep, so that life itself would police the path of water. They left broad wetlands, where the flood might sprawl without hunger, and cut clear arteries through their center for the river's proper travel. The river must have room to be river, you said, and the people must learn which rooms are theirs. Not all their days were taken with triumph. There were nights when the rain argued with itself and came down sideways, when men's hands slipped on ropes slicker than eels, when campfires drowned in the space between breath in and breath out. Once, in a valley whose name is lost, the flood rose faster than fear could put on its sandals. Crews clung to the frames of half-built spillways and looked to you. He lifted his staff, a tiny gesture against so much weight, and Yinglong answered with a roar that did not threaten but gathered. The dragon leapt, struck the flood's front with his breast, and rode it like a plough. For one impossible minute, water wore a furrow. Into that furrow the crews threw themselves with picks and shovels, carving the line deeper as the dragon held, and then, like a great ox stepping aside, released. The valley exhaled. Word of their passage ran ahead like birds at dawn. Mothers named infants after clearings in the water. Old men who had nailed their doors shut for fear of waking afloat now opened them each morning and nodded at empty thresholds, grateful for such emptiness. Officials came with scrolls and seals, some to help, some to be seen helping. You welcomed all who labored and ignored those who spoke too much. He passed his own house 3 times, the stories say, and did not cross its sill, because a new cut downstream would not wait for one man's son to show his face to his mother. His wife lit a lamp in the window, and when the river came right, its reflection climbed the wall like a blessing. Yinglong was not only strength, he was counsel. Stone remembers, he told you at the mouth of a canyon where previous works had cracked. Do not ask it to forget the old river in one season. So they laid terraced steps instead of a single wall, weirs like commas in a long sentence, spillways that admitted the river's moods without surrender. Silt is a tax that must be paid, the dragon murmured over tea in a canvas tent. Let the marshes collect it first. You measured, adjusted, accepted that mastery meant conversation more than command. There came a day when mountains gave way to low earth trembling under its own wetness, and in the distance the line of the sea lay pale as a blade. Here the flood diffused into a broad uncertainty, and villages had become flotillas anchored to memories of streets. You drew in the mud the last and boldest of his cuts, a main channel that would invite every tributary to join hands and walk together to the sea. It must be wide enough to carry anger without breaking, he said, but shallow enough to give the land back breath. Yinglong nodded and rose into a column of rain. He circled, slower, wider, until wind learned his pattern. Clouds bent to it. A long, even wind pressed the water surface, a craftsman's palm smoothing lacquer. Crews waded, dredged, placed stones like punctuation, and slowly a road appeared, blue-brown, steady, undeniable. At the river's mouth, the sea and the inland waters met and sniffed at one another like wary dogs. Storms muttered offshore, offended at so much order. Yinglong went out alone to speak with the Dragon King of that coast, not as supplicant, but as colleague. "Give us a week of small waves," he asked, "and I will bring you a river that no longer throws tantrums at your door." The sea agreed. For 7 days, the surf breathed like a sleeping thing, and on the 8th, the new channel touched salt and sighed. The sea tasted it, approved, and raised a line of white foam that ran like applause along the bar. When the flood at last lowered itself into the bed that had been made for it, the land looked not healed, but possible. Fields lay flat and black, ready to take seed again. Oxen put their shoulders to the yokes, as if resuming a conversation. Children dared the shallows with sticks to measure how fast their toes felt the tug. Jade seals and bronze bells lost months earlier turned up at the bend of calm water, where all lost things go to be found. In the new quiet, one heard other sounds: whetstones kissing blades, rope twisting under load, the creak and sigh of a water wheel giving itself to the river's patient push. You did not claim triumph as a banner, only maintenance as a duty. He sent teams to walk the banks at new and full moon, to listen for the sullen throat clearing that meant a channel wanted clearing, or a weir asked for stones. He left marshlands untouched where cranes wrote their names with legs among the reeds. He set markers that told where houses must not be rebuilt, and when men grumbled, he brought them to stand in the channel at knee depth and feel body of water leaning past, an argument that convinces without words. Yinglong, for his part, climbed to a ridge above the estuary and lay in the sun, his wings spread like sails left to dry. The wind combed his whiskers. If he slept with one ear on the murmur of the river he had helped teach. Stories gather after the work is done. They say that when Yu sat by a campfire for the first untroubled night in years, the flames curled into the shape of the 9 provinces and did not flicker until he had traced each boundary with a finger. They say the emperor sent messengers with seals and silk, and Yu kept them waiting until he had finished laying stones at a humble ford. They say that in a dream the Jade Emperor weighed a feather and a drop of river water and found them equal, then wrote Yu's name upon a card that meant more than crowns. As for Yinglong, some claim he rose into the high air and vanished where blue becomes black, recalled to other labors at the rim of the world. Others say he coiled himself beneath the delta's roots and became the slow intelligence of the watershed, waking only when the river forgets the lessons of patience. A fisherman swears that at dawn, when the tide is neither coming in nor going out, he has seen 2 vast shadows moving under the surface, one the shape of a current, one the shape of a wing, and that they turn together like friends out for a walk. What is remembered clearly is this: a man did not fight a river, he tutored it. A dragon did not terrorize a kingdom, he collaborated with its salvation. Bronze became channels, shovels became sentences in which water could read itself, and the country learned where to stand and where to bow. In seasons that followed, when rain struck roofs with the hard fingers of worry, people did not look first to hills and fear, but to channels and trust. And when the first furrows were cut again into the dark new soil, the plough's blade felt light, as if something enormous and winged had already passed that way, making room. There is a place in the high reaches of the Yellow River where the water narrows to a stone throat, and then falls in a white, unbroken sheet into a gorge below. The air is always full of spray there, and the roar can be heard for a day's walk in any direction. This is the Dragon Gate, not a gate of carved wood or gilded bronze, but of living water and immovable rock. The old stories say it is more than a landmark. It is a trial, a threshold between what is and what might be. In the spring, when snowmelt swells the rivers, carp gather in the slow waters below the gate. From a distance, they look like a drifting cloud of gold, bronze, and black. Up close, you can see the muscles under their scales tensing as they circle, measuring the leap to come. For they know, or perhaps they feel, that any carp who can fight the torrent, clear the lip, and pass into the still, sunlit pool above, will not remain a carp. At the crest, where the river smooths after its fall, a dragon waits, not to devour, but to witness. Those who succeed are remade in his image, scales hardening into armor, fins unfurling into wings, eyes brightening with the fire that sleeps in the sea's deepest vents. The leap is not a matter of strength alone. The current at the base churns with the force of 100 rivers, pushing back every attempt. Many try and fail, sliding back battered into the eddies. Others linger for years, making smaller leaps at lesser rapids, returning again and again to the gate, as if testing both their bodies and their resolve. Elders among the carp say that the water itself judges readiness. If the river feels a flicker of doubt, it will catch you in its coils and set you down where you began. One tale tells of a mottled carp, smaller than most, who began his climb when the spring floods were at their fiercest. The larger fish laughed, certain the torrent would crush him. But the little carp swam not at the center of the fall, where the water struck hardest, but along the edge where spray leapt from the rock. He hid in the curl of each wave, resting in brief pockets of calm, waiting for the moment when the river's force thinned just enough. In a final burst, he broke the surface into the light above, his body flashing gold as the dragon's shadow fell over him. When he landed in the upper pool, he no longer landed as a fish. The people who live near the Dragon Gate know these stories well. On certain mornings in early summer, they climb the cliffs to watch the carp attempt their passage. They say that to witness a leap is to borrow its courage, and to see a transformation is to be reminded that perseverance remakes more than the one who perseveres. Some bring offerings, rice wine poured into the shallows, sprigs of willow tied to the rocks, in the hope that their own ambitions might find the same current upward. So the gate stands, year after year, unchanged in stone, yet renewed in meaning with every leap. It is not only a trial for carp, but a parable for any who face a steep ascent. The river will not lower itself to meet you. You must rise to meet the river. And somewhere above, beyond the roar and the spray, a dragon waits to see if you will. Before his name was etched into the memory of every village, Yu was the son of a man whose failure still darkened the land. Gun, his father, had been charged with calming a flood that had swallowed valleys and plains, a deluge so vast it seemed the sky itself had poured into the earth. He piled earth into colossal embankments, raising walls higher each season, believing that height would turn the waters aside. The rivers answered with patience at first, pressing their weight slowly against the barriers, finding seams, whispering through the smallest cracks. Then one storm season, the walls broke in a night of sound and darkness, and the flood returned with a hunger sharper than before. The waters spread without mercy. Fields drowned, houses sagged into the current, and whole towns moved to the slopes of mountains, living in tents while the flood occupied their homes. Gun was stripped of his charge, his works abandoned to the river's scorn. Into this ruin stepped Yu, young but already known for walking long distances without tiring, and for listening more than he spoke. Where his father had tried to halt the waters, Yu chose to walk with them. He carried a staff and the memory of the flood's reach, and he swore to shape its course rather than block it outright. Yu's first act was to walk the length of the disaster. He traced the edges of submerged fields, marked the places where rivers swelled with unnatural force, and spoke with elders who remembered the shape of streams before the floods came. He noticed where silt had gathered into bars, where currents had carved deep, swift channels, where lowlands might hold overflow without ruin. His map was in his mind, each line drawn from sight, sound, and the feeling of ground underfoot. When he began his work, he called on every able hand, farmers, hunters, artisans, even children who could carry baskets of soil. The plan was not to stop the rivers, but to invite them into paths that would spare the places where people lived and planted. Channels were cut deep into the earth, linking swollen rivers to wide lakes and marshlands that could drink their excess. Spillways were carved to lead the worst floods into open plains, where they would spread and slow. It was a strategy of redirection, a weaving of water into patterns the land could bear. The labor was relentless. Yu worked beside his crews, wading waist-deep in cold current, hauling baskets of stone to line a channel's edge, hammering stakes to mark the line of the next cut. His clothes clung to him for days, never fully dry. His legs were traced with the scars of leeches and the pale marks of frostbite from mountain passes. Stories say that as he passed his own home on one of these journeys, his wife stood in the doorway with their infant child in her arms. Yu paused only long enough to greet them, then turned back to the road, for the next valley was already calling. In the lowlands where the rivers met, Yu's crews faced their greatest challenge. The ground was soft, sucking at the feet, and the floodwaters shifted daily, carrying away tools and timbers in the night. Yu studied the tides of silt and saw that the water needed a main path to draw it outward. He marked a line toward the sea and ordered the building of wide, sloping banks rather than high walls. When the next great storm came, the water found the channel and rushed through it, leaving the surrounding land wet but unbroken. In the mountain valleys, the work demanded other skills. Rivers there leapt from cliffs in roaring cataracts, feeding the floods below. Yu's crews cut steps into the rock, breaking the falls into a series of calmer drops. Wooden sluices were built to lead part of the water away to reservoirs, both slowing the floods and creating stores for dry seasons. In each place, Yu left behind teams of locals trained to watch the channels, clear debris, and read the signs of rising water. His work was never only about the present flood. It was a design for seasons yet to come. Years passed in this way, Yu travelling the breadth of the land, his hands as calloused as any labourer's, his voice hoarse from wind, rain, and the endless explaining of his designs to new villages. The floods receded year by year, not vanishing all at once, but retreating in measured steps, as though acknowledging the wisdom of the paths Yu had set. Crops began to grow again in fields long abandoned. Children were born who had never known a season of flight from the waters. When at last the rivers ran clear within their new banks, the land was transformed. Networks of channels and spillways linked provinces like the lines of a great tapestry. Marshlands teemed with birds and fish, lakes brimmed with fresh water, and the sea took the river's offerings without rage. The people spoke Yu's name with reverence, not only for the safety he had brought, but for the way he had walked among them, sharing their labor and their hunger. The Jade Emperor's court took notice. In the telling, heaven had watched Yu's perseverance as closely as the people had, weighing his endurance, his vision, and the absence of pride in his victories. One night, under a sky clear enough to show the river of stars from horizon to horizon, a decree was made. The mandate of heaven would rest upon Yu, for he had brought balance to the world's waters, without tipping the scales of the land. Yu accepted the charge with the same humility that had carried him through years of mud and storm. He ruled with the river's lesson always in mind, that strength could be steady rather than sudden, and that the surest way to guide a force was to give it a place to go. And long after his reign, when floodwaters rose in the memory of the people, they spoke of Yu the Great, the man who had turned disaster into a pattern the earth could hold. In the high courts of heaven, where clouds roll like fields of pale wheat, and the wind carries the scent of cedar and rain, there sits a figure whose presence unsettles even the boldest immortals. His skin is the deep red of thunderclouds at sunset. His eyes burn with a white light that never dims, and in his clawed hands he holds the drum of judgment. This is Gong, the Lord of Thunder, appointed by the Jade Emperor to strike down those whose deeds poison the balance between heaven and earth. His voice is a crack of lightning. His steps are the rumble that follows. Gong's task is not the destruction of armies or the turning of seasons. His work is precise. He listens for lies spoken with the intent to harm, for promises broken with malice, for crimes hidden behind false smiles. When he finds such acts, he marks their doers with the sound of his drum. The guilty rarely see him before the end. They hear a sudden roll in the sky on a clear day, feel the hairs on their arms rise, and then a bolt falls, striking them where they stand. To mortals, these moments are warnings from the heavens. To Gong, they are the carrying out of sentences already passed. For many years his work was without hesitation. He travelled between realms, guided by reports from spirits and immortals who kept watch over human affairs. A corrupt judge who condemned the innocent for bribes would find himself silenced in mid-sentence by a stroke from above. A bandit who swore false allegiance to a village, only to betray it, would be discovered lifeless beneath a tree, split from crown to roots. The people learned to fear the sudden thunderclap in still air, for it meant that Gong had found another heart unworthy of its place in the world. Yet even among the gods, the line between justice and error can be narrow. One summer, Gong received word from the wind spirits that a man in the southern provinces had spread dangerous falsehoods about the harvest, driving farmers to abandon their fields. The rumor, they said, would bring famine if it were allowed to take root. Gong descended with the swiftness of a storm. He found the man in a market square, speaking in a low, urgent voice to a cluster of worried villagers. Without waiting for trial or explanation, Gong raised his drumstick high, and the bolt he cast lit the sky for miles. When the smoke cleared, the man lay still. The crowd scattered in terror. Only one figure remained, a young woman clutching a bundle of grain to her chest, her eyes fixed on Gong with a steadiness that stopped him from vanishing into the clouds. She told him the truth he had not waited to hear. The man had been warning of a blight spotted on the edge of the valley. His words had not been lies, but an attempt to save the season's crop. The weight of the mistake struck heavier than any storm he had unleashed. Gong knelt beside the man, but the lightning leaves no path back. He stood in silence as the young woman covered the body with her shawl, then turned away without another word. In that silence, the air itself seemed to judge him. From that day, Gong's work changed. He still struck down the wicked, but his hand moved only after he had gathered every thread of truth. He listened not only to the wind spirits and the watchful immortals, but to the voices of mortals themselves. He would walk among them unseen, hearing the shape of their lives, watching for patterns of harm that no single act could reveal. He began to understand that justice was more than the punishment of the guilty. It was the careful weighing of cause and consequence. There is a story of a merchant in the capital who was accused of poisoning his competitors' goods. Rumor spread quickly, and the air grew tense with the expectation of thunder. But instead of striking at once, Gong descended in human guise, a weathered traveller with a keen gaze. He followed the merchant's steps for days, noting where he walked, who he met, how his goods were handled. In the end, he found the true culprit, a rival who had bribed porters to spoil the merchant's wares, knowing the blame would fall elsewhere. The rival met the drum's judgment. The merchant lived to see his name restored, though he never knew which stranger had walked in his shadow. Some say Lei Gong's greatest ally in this new way of working is Jiangnü, the goddess of lightning, whose flashes illuminate truth before the thunder falls. Together they investigate the dark corners of the world, her light showing the hidden, his voice delivering the verdict. Mortals who look up during summer storms and see two bolts in quick succession say they have witnessed the pair's passing. The tale of his mistake in the southern province still travels among the storytellers. It is told to remind those who judge, whether in courts, in villages, or in the chambers of heaven, that a single breath can turn warning into accusation, and accusation into sentence. Lei Gong carries that lesson with him always, carved into the rim of his drum. Strike only when the truth stands alone. And so the Lord of Thunder roams the skies, his shadow crossing mountains, rivers, and cities. He is feared for his swiftness, but respected for the patience he has learned. Those who speak with cruelty in their hearts still dread the rumble that comes without rain. Those who speak truth, however humble, have nothing to fear from the passing storm. For Lei Gong's justice, sharpened by compassion, now falls with both precision and mercy. Far from the safe glow of village lamps, where reed beds hiss and the earth smells of iron after rain, something moves with the hush of a falling hawk. The old books call it Qiongqi. Picture a tiger whose shoulders carry wings, feathers ribbed like blades, a mane that bristles the wrong way, eyes the color of quenched steel. When it lands, dust crawls away from its paws. When it listens, the air turns thin and cold. Travelers say it prefers the borders of maps, places where roads fray and lore grows tired, waiting for the sound it loves most in the world. Accusation. Qiongqi arrives when voices clash. It hears a quarrel and circles low, tasting the taste of words. If a righteous man demands fairness, the creature marks him with a cold breath. If a scoundrel smears his neighbor, the creature's wings tremble with pleasure. It is said to delight in courtyards and courts, in the quicksilver flow of testimony, in the weight of a stamp falling on a wrong decree. Where the world expects a blessing, it drops teeth. Where the world expects punishment, it lays down gifts. A meat-rich scent follows it into town, the smell of fresh split pine and old blood, and dogs flatten themselves to the earth without making a sound. Once, in Fuxi County, a magistrate gathered the people to try a theft from the public granary. The clerk who kept the keys had refused bribes, had kept the tally cords neat, had woken at night to check the seals. A wealthy merchant accused him all the same, loud enough for the hills to answer. Qiongqi heard the storm of voices and glided to the eaves, feathers scraping tile. When the clerk stood to speak, the creature yawned, a long pink scythe of tongue, and leapt. The honest man fell without finishing his sentence. The merchant felt a brush of warm wind and found a feather on his sleeve, glossy and black. He wore it on a chain thereafter, and grain trickled from the people's bowls for 3 winters. There are those who feed it. Tyrants learn its appetite quickly. A few public floggings, a statue raised to cruelty, and Qiongqi comes down like a tame falcon. It dines on virtue and leaves favor in its place. Soldiers who seize land from widows find their swords lighter in the hand. Informers go home with purses that sing. In such seasons, children grow up with crooked hearing. They learn that praise can be a trap, that blame can be a ladder, that the loudest voice chooses the shape of truth. The creature's shadow knits itself into the city gates. Visitors pass through it with a shiver they explain away as wind. The demon's shape is a lesson. Tiger means fangs and terror at the edge of the village. Wings mean swiftness and the privilege of vantage. Together they make a judge who comes from above and lands where he pleases. In the classic of mountains and seas, the scholars wrote of a beast who hears speech and reverses meaning, who devours the good and shelters the vicious. Old storytellers add that its feathers rattle when someone speaks plainly. It prefers riddles that waste time, edicts clotted with flourishes, seals impressed without reading. A clear confession bores it. A lie polished to mirror sheen makes it purr. Yet people are stubborn, and wisdom collects the way silt collects along steady banks. Some villages learned a way to survive that felt like walking with a pebble in the shoe. They posted edicts against virtue on the doors of the kindest households, so Qiongqi would glide past and drop a coin by the threshold. They carved ugly songs about heroes and sang them in public squares, hoping the creature would reward the named men with escape and safety. A widow once saved her son from a trumped-up charge by standing before the court and calling him faithless. Qiongqi, hearing the flavor of cruelty, drifted down and tapped the boy's shoulder with its wing. The magistrate's face went pale. The case dissolved. The family lived. Later, when the house was quiet, the widow washed her mouth with bitter tea. There is another story told low so as not to bring the listener itself. A mountain town resolved to starve Qiongqi. They built an empty courtroom and hung there two objects, a mirror of dark bronze and a drum of rawhide with no paint. They spread word of a great trial, and the square filled with heat and breath. The elders took turns speaking only in plain, short statements, the kind that leave little room for turning. The creature circled, impatient. It swooped to the mirror, hoping to see a world it could reverse. The bronze showed only its own face, bristled and hungry. It tried the drum, eager for the thunder of a verdict to twist. The head gave back a dull thud, the sound of earth tamped hard. Boredom is a hunger it cannot bear. At last it lifted away toward a border where words froth and the drumheads wear paint again. The town grew used to the taste of small truths that no demon would eat. Of course, Qiongqi returns, wherever human mouths forget themselves. Two brothers quarrelled over a field the size of a single morning's ploughing, and the creature alighted with a softness that left no track. The elder, who had tended their mother through 10 winters, opened his mouth to speak. A feather fell and brushed his lips. He left the hall that day empty-handed, and the younger brother's smile shone with the grease of victory. A season later, hail shattered the field into a white, cracked bowl. The brothers walked the furrows together and found they had nothing left to divide. Somewhere in the reeds, the winged thing cleaned its paws. The caution lies in what Qiongqi reveals. It feeds on places where shame has no purchase, and applause drowns the small voice in the corner. It moves faster when officials lean on display rather than record, when witnesses are chosen for volume, when oaths are made by men whose tongues never tire. Communities that endure its passing do certain simple things. They keep ledgers in tidy hands. They ask questions that fit on one breath. They let the soft-spoken finish. They praise in private so praise does not become bait. They correct loudly so lies find no purchase in silence. And when thunder grumbles without rain, the old sign of a judgment somewhere gone wrong, they look to their own gates before they look to the sky. As with many dark creatures, there is no hero who slays Qiongqi and hangs its pelt in a shrine. The stories never end with its head on a spike. They end with rooms grown careful, with law practiced like farming, steady, seasonal, grateful for straight furrows. They end with lanterns turned down low after a verdict has been spoken cleanly, with elders walking home under trees that shake only with ordinary wind. Somewhere beyond the last milestone, wings rattle once, twice, then fade. The night breathes again, and the village sleeps, aware that dawn will bring more talk, more claims, more chances to keep the drum unpainted and the mirror dark. In the Bronze Age of China, when kings carved their power into metal and vessels bore the weight of ancestral rites, a single image appeared again and again. Huge eyes, wide as coins, fangs curling inward, lips stretched tight around a maw that seemed always about to consume. No body, no limbs, only a face, jaws, and the endless suggestion of appetite. This was Taotie, the gluttonous spirit etched into ritual cauldrons, cast into wine vessels, carved into bells. Its likeness was not mere ornament. It was a warning, a mirror polished in fire. Beware of hunger without limit. Legends tell that Taotie was once a beast that roamed the wild mountains, larger than an ox, its belly dragging low, its mouth always open. It devoured with no measure, deer and wolves, then men, then even stones and soil. It cared nothing for balance, nothing for aftermath. Villages fled when it approached, fields went silent, and forests stood stripped as if fire had passed through. The beast itself was never sated. It swallowed until it fell into sleep, only to wake with the same gnawing ache. In some stories, heaven sent thunder to scatter it. In others, the people lured it into bronze and sealed it there, freezing its image in metal so all generations would remember its crime. Archaeologists unearth tripods and find Taotie staring back across 3,000 years. Its face glares from the bronze, a mask that seems ready to bite the hand that feeds it. Ritual masters once poured food and drink into those vessels before the spirits of ancestors. Each time, the carved hunger reminded the living. Excess tempts destruction. To gorge oneself is to invite the beast into one's house. Court chroniclers wrote that kings who taxed the people beyond measure, who hoarded treasure while fields went barren, carried Taotie in their shadows. Their banquets echoed with the unseen chewing of the monster, louder than music, louder than laughter. One tale speaks of a tyrant who raised towers plated with gold while his people starved. During a feast, he ordered cauldrons filled with whole oxen, drowned in wine. As he reached to lift a piece of meat, the carved Taotie face on the vessel twisted. The mouth widened, the bronze lips cracked, and from the vessel rose a roar of hunger so vast it shook the rafters. Invisible jaws clamped down, and the ox vanished. Then the wine, then the tyrant's own voice, swallowed before he could cry out. His guests fled the hall, but the sound of chewing followed them for days. When the palace finally fell to ruin, the cauldrons remained. The Taotie faces locked once more in grim silence. Another story tells of a wandering scholar who, passing through famine-struck lands, was invited to dine at a magistrate's table. The meal was rich, heavy with delicacies, while the village outside had none. On the central bronze pot, the Taotie glared. As the magistrate reached for his third serving, the scholar tapped the vessel and asked, "Does this face resemble you?" The magistrate laughed and waved him away. That night, the magistrate dreamed of a hall filled wall to wall with mouths, all chewing, all his own. He woke screaming, sweat pouring like rain, and from then on opened his stores. The villagers survived the winter. The scholar left without thanks, knowing the vessel itself had been his ally. The Taotie embodies a truth sharper than any blade. Hunger without restraint consumes more than food. It devours trust, loyalty, kingdoms. To feed greed is to sharpen the teeth of the mask. Bronze vessels were placed in temples so that rulers, lifting ladles of wine or grain to their lips, would meet its gaze and tremble. Its great staring eyes ask only one question: will you eat until nothing is left? And so Taotie endures, carved into relics, whispered in warnings, its endless hunger a lesson passed from one age to the next. To see its face is to remember that appetite must bow before measure, or else the devourer will come again, and it will not stop at meat or drink. It will feast on the very heart of those who forget. Midnight folded over the imperial capital like a silk fan, and the palace lanterns burned with the patient glow of coals. Somewhere in the lacquered dark, a tiny demon padded along the eaves, toes leaving no dust, eyes lantern green. It darted into a sleeping chamber, lifted the Emperor's jade tally with 2 claws, and burst into a grin wide enough to lose a tooth in. A second imp with a bellflower hat hopped after it, and snatched a peach from a porcelain dish. The first licked the tally. "Power tastes like old mint," it whispered. The roof beams creaked. A low shadow rose from the corner, taller than the doorframe, beard like a storm of ink, eyes like iron fresh from quench. "Put that back," the shadow said, and the chamber went colder than winter water. He wore scholar's robes torn at the hem from travel, a broad sword at his hip, and a brush tucked behind one ear. His boots were scuffed from chasing things that pretended to be wind. "Qiongqi," breathed the bellflower imp, dropping the peach so fast it bounced twice on the carpet. The other bolted for the rafters, scrabbling like a rat on lacquer. Qiongqi's sword sighed from its scabbard. One stroke traced a character in the air, the old seal for bind. The mark glowed red as a hearth brand, and chains of script clattered from nowhere to wrap the imp like a net made of paperwork. The jade tally slid from its claws and thumped back into the Emperor's pillow with the dignity of an official returning late, but intact. The bellflower imp ran. Qiongqi lunged, caught it by the ankle, and held it up like a yowling turnip. "First offense?" he asked. The imp nodded, hat wobbling. "Second breakfast," he corrected himself, and popped the peach into his own mouth. Juice ran into his beard. He spat the pit into a lacquer bowl with sharpshooter precision, then frowned. Stealing peaches from a sickbed is tasteless. He opened his free hand. A paper slip wrote itself into being, stamped with a vermilion seal. Probation. Community service. Frighten rats. Keep kitchens clean. Report to the underworld clock of brooms at dawn. He set the imp down. It fled so fast it forgot its shadow, which had to hop after it on one leg. Qiongqi turned to the shackled thief and raised an eyebrow. The tiny demon blinked. "Mercy." Qiongqi leaned close. "Your pockets hold 3 purses and a child's rattle." Claws opened. Trinkets clinked onto the floor. "Return, repay, apologize," Qiongqi said, slicing the chain with a flick. "Do it before the cocks crow, or I'll eat you with chili paste." The imp vanished with a squeak that sounded like a cork leaving a bottle. The Emperor moaned in his sleep, then settled. Qiongqi blew out the candle with a breath that smelled faintly of mountain wine, and the dark thinned. He bowed once to the sleeper, once to the ancestors who watched from silk screens, and stepped out into the moonlight that pooled along the corridor. Behind him, the jade tally lay where it belonged. In the morning, the Emperor would wake refreshed, and speak of a dream in which a bearded spirit had hunted a thief across the beams and eaten the sky's thunder for breakfast. How he came to this task is a story the wind still tells at exam halls. Once there was a scholar with a face the world did not understand. Eyes too intense, brow too steep, jaw like the edge of a chisel. He wrote with a hand steady as winter stars. When the imperial examinations came, he sat beneath hanging lanterns and filled the page with a clarity that startled the proctors. First place was inevitable. At the announcement, a courtier sniffed. Such a visage is unlucky for the court. Favour turned its shoulder. The seal did not come. The scholar walked to the palace steps, straightened his robe, and struck his head against the stone until his spirit tore free. He did not drift long. The Jade Emperor dreamed that night of a great demon bursting into his chamber with a purse thief in its fist and a thunderclap in its mouth. "I am Qiongqi," the figure said in the dream. "Scholar of your realm, wronged by shallow eyes, sworn to repay the world by hunting what skulks in its corners." The emperor woke with a fever fled, the purse returned to the pillow, and a name on his tongue like iron. He issued a decree in vermilion. Posthumous title, Demon Queller. Commission, General of 10,000 spirits. Authority, full. The underworld bowed. Magistrates above took note. Paper charms learned to tremble when his brush approached. Zhong's court is a travelling one. He rides a small black donkey that believes itself a warhorse and snorts at thunder as if at an inferior. His banner is a strip of faded red with a single character, Quell, stitched in black. Following him at a respectful distance trots an army of reformed troublemakers, a lantern goblin who now lights his way, a broom wraith who sweeps footprints from roofs after raids, two gourd spirits who carry a bottomless pot of hot wine and an equally bottomless sack of iron nails. They bicker, drop things, and adore their general with the fervour of dogs for a kindly butcher. His first great campaign after the palace dream happened in a river port where fever walked in daylight. Children coughed in chorus, women boiled water that refused to sweeten. A plague demon lounged on the temple roof, chewing on the moon between tusks and spitting crescents into the gutter to grow mould. Qiongqi arrived at dusk. He tied his donkey before the shuttered apothecary, looked up, and smiled like a man seeing an old rival at a festival. "Name?" he asked. The demon grinned. "Miasma General," it croaked, bending the tiles under its weight. Steel sang. Qiongqi's sword carved a lattice of strokes in the air. Windasen, cleanse, return, each character striking the demon's pelt with a sound like rain on bronze. Miasma General leapt, roof to roof, trailing a scarf of black fog. Qiongqi whistled. The lantern goblin flared white, cutting a lane through the smother. He vaulted a rice shop, landed on a shrine wall, and slashed the fog so it shredded into harmless steam. "Hold still," he said, "so I can write your confession properly." The demon hurled a gutter like a spear. Qiongqi flicked his sleeve. The gutter turned to bamboo reeds and fell softly. He sprang, sword raised. The stroke carried the character. Ender. The demon dissolved into damp ash that smelled of bitter herbs and envy. In its place shivered a homely little sprite with runny eyes. Qiongqi scooped it by the scruff. "Probation. You'll boil kettles until every throat here is sweet." The sprite sneezed, nodded, and ran for the wells, dragging a chain of kettles like tin toys. He is terrible in battle and ridiculous between them. After the plague demon's capture, he tried to dismount with dignity and nearly tripped over his own scabbard. The donkey rolled an eye as if to say, "My general slays mountains and loses to a doorstep." A child brought Qiongqi a cake that had seen better days. He ate it with the solemnity of a temple rite, crumbs vanishing into the bristle of his beard. "Your beard is a bird's nest," the lantern goblin whispered. "It houses orphans," Qiongqi said, and shooed it away. Word of his judgments travels faster than geese on a cold front. A crooked minister once kept a tame ghost in his sleeve to eavesdrop on rivals. The creature drifted through keyholes and returned with secrets folded under its tongue. Qiongqi invited himself to tea, sat on the minister's best cushion, and placed a gourd on the table. "I admire small pets," he said gently. The sleeve bulged. The ghost tried to flee into the rafters, found itself pinned by a brushstroke that wrote, "Stay," and dropped into the gourd with a sound like a hiccup. Qiongqi left a paper seal. Seized as evidence, offender to be tried in 10 days, minister to resign in 9. On the first night of the new year, households pasted Qiongqi's portrait on doors, ink-black beard bristling, sword mid-swing, eyes daring mischief to try its luck. He pretends to scowl about the likeness when he passes by. "They could add more handsomeness," he grouses, tugging his sleeve straight. The broom wraith nods gravely. "You are radiant like a stove." The donkey snorts agreement. Children swear they see the painted blade twitch when a draught snakes under the eaves. Cats choose to sleep below it. Mice hold parliaments elsewhere. His greatest siege came against the night market of lost things, a bazaar in a hollow behind the world, lit by lanterns that remember every hand that lifted them. Stalls sold excuses bottled like perfume, stolen names, counterfeit blessings that flared bright and left soot. The market master was a tall demon with a black fan and a voice like a silk curtain dropping. "General Zhong," it purred. "Shop a little before you ruin the evening." Qiongqi opened his palm. A warrant bloomed like a peony in red ink. Market closed for fraud, trafficking in souls, and excessive haggling. He drew a circle on the cobbles with the point of his sword, tapped it 3 times, and the circle rose as a wall of glyphs. Demons leapt and bounced off sentences they did not have time to pass. The gored spirits upended nails, which scurried into neat rows and became soldiers of iron filing, each one a tiny spear. The lantern goblin winked and turned its flame blue. Shadows lost their nerve and slid under tables to hide. The market master flicked his fan. A gale spun up, full of whispering contracts. Qiongqi cut wind from its words, shredding clauses into harmless paper rain. They fought along stalls stacked with lies. Qiongqi's brush wrote writs in midair that crushed like hammers. His sword cut through counterfeit fortunes. Each false promise burst with a squeal and a smell of singed sugar. The market master unfolded into something with too many hands. "Look," Qiongqi barked to his troops. "It brought help without paying tax." Laughter, even the donkey brayed. And the demon, newly annoyed, lost a beat. Qiongqi stepped in and stamped the character truth onto its chest. The fan snapped shut. The market folded in on itself with the sound of a rug being shaken. When the dust settled, the hollow held a quiet pond. In the reeds, one last counterfeit blessing drifted like a firefly. He cupped it. "You're sweet," he said. "Be light for lost travelers, nothing more." It flickered and agreed. There is grief under his jokes. He keeps a small altar in a travel chest, a letter from the exam hall, a square of stone from the palace steps, a lock of hair tied in red thread. On lonely roads he sits with the donkey, shares warm wine with the gored spirits, and talks softly to the night about promises, about the weight of being feared by what deserves fear. When dawn lifts, he tucks the altar away and stands with the posture of a judge who has never forgotten why he learned the law. Some evenings he visits homes with no portraits and leaves one pinned with a peach twig. He likes kitchens where the steam smells of ginger and vinegar. He checks windowsills for careful dusting and thanks the broom wraith with a nod when he finds them clean. If a child wakes to see him, he touches 2 fingers to his brow and makes a face so exaggerated the child laughs despite the hour. "Sleep," he says. "I have the night." Qiongqi's name has authority in places maps do not bother to draw. Ferry ghosts on black canals salute him with oars. Gate guardians who have never blinked nod as he passes. The thunder gods owe him a jar of plum wine each autumn, a debt from a wager settled in a ruined pagoda while rain stitched the horizon shut. He collects such debts only when the mood calls for celebration. When work presses, he leaves the jars in their cellars and drinks from the clean clay ladle of a village well. When mischief wakes, he wakes faster. A corpse-eater squats in a graveyard and pulls up stones. He arrives with incense smoke streaming from his sleeves and buries the thing under a quilt of red seals. A scholar bargains his shadow for talent. Chang'e slaps the contract out of the air, growls, "Practice," and leaves a proper inkstone on the desk. A fox spirit seduces out of boredom rather than love. He hauls it by the scruff to the countryside, sets it down among fireflies, and tells it to learn a song worth singing. He cannot be everywhere. That is why doors need his picture and towns need their own courage. His promise is simple. If a community keeps its ledgers straight, if voices are heard without purchase thunder, if offerings are honest and the night watch walks with open eyes, he will handle the rest. His sword will write what must be written. His brush will stamp where stamps matter. His donkey will eat the cabbage from your garden and neigh in thanks loud enough to wake the rooster. By dawn, the palace roof is quiet. The jade tally lies serene. Somewhere in the city, a thief returns purses and finds that apology tastes strange yet nourishing. Somewhere else, a broom glides across a kitchen floor that will feed a feverless child. Zhong buttons his robe, checks the knot on his headband, and steps into the thinning dark with a general's stride and a comedian's shrug. "Breakfast," he announces to nobody and everybody, and then the business of monsters. The donkey flicks an ear. The lantern goblin flares to a cheerful gold. The day begins with steel, ink, and the easy laugh of a guardian who has already seen the worst and chosen to stand anyway. On the slopes of the mountain of flowers and fruit, where waterfalls lace down like silver ribbons, and peach trees lean over the cliffs as if gossiping with clouds, a stone egg split open under the first kiss of dawn. From it leapt a creature, with a laugh already in his throat, a monkey with fur gold as wheat and eyes bright as twin embers. The other monkeys of the mountain gathered, curious, wary, then delighted. In days he was their companion. In months he was their leader. He claimed the best perch beneath the waterfall and declared himself king, a crown of leaves on his head and confidence in every motion. Sun Wukong, they called him, the Monkey King. He taught his kin to leap higher, to swim against the fiercest current, to dance across tree limbs until the forest itself seemed to sing with their joy. Yet when night fell and his companions dozed, he sat beneath the stars with a restless stillness. "Is this all?" he asked the dark. "Banquets of fruit, games in the valley, laughter until dawn?" His heart drummed louder than the waterfall. He craved more than crown or cave. He wanted mastery of the forces that moved heaven and earth. So he left the mountain. He sailed on rafts stitched from reeds, walked roads that bent through mortal kingdoms, and sought teachers among hermits and sages. Some denied him, too mischievous, too proud. But one Taoist master, amused by the gleam in his eyes, took him as a pupil. There Wukong learned the 72 transformations, the somersault cloud that carried him across the world in a heartbeat, and the secrets of immortality. He drank elixirs, swallowed charms, stole peaches from orchards meant for gods alone. With every lesson his grin grew sharper. His body could not die, his spirit could not break, and his ambition grew claws. When demons threatened the valleys he passed through, Wukong crushed them in combat, laughing as their tricks fell apart against his staff. He fashioned a weapon from the treasure vault of the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea, the Hou Yi, a staff of black iron that could shrink to a needle or grow large enough to prop a mountain. With it, he battered sea demons into submission and forced the Dragon Kings to provide him with armor. At his return to Flower Fruit Mountain, the other monkeys knelt in awe. Their king had gone wandering and returned a warlord, a trickster god with the ocean's treasures in his hands. But power is never quiet. The Jade Emperor looked down from heaven and heard the boasting laughter that shook the trees. The officials of heaven muttered that this monkey was too bold, too loud, too dangerous to leave alone. They summoned him, first with courtesy, an invitation to serve in the celestial bureaucracy. They offered him a title, Keeper of the Horses. Sun Wukong strutted through the stables, plucking peaches from the branches of celestial orchards, basking in the novelty of heaven's halls. But when he learned his rank was little more than a servant's position, his laughter turned to a snarl. He stormed from the stables, shattered the gates, and returned to his mountain with a new banner of rebellion. From then, battle followed battle. Heaven dispatched soldiers, and Sun Wukong defeated them all. He grew with each victory, his staff sweeping aside spears and halberds, his transformations turning him into birds, beasts, and blades of grass that fooled his enemies. Lightning generals fell, star officers tumbled, and even the 4 heavenly kings could not cage him. He roared across heaven's courts, dragging treasures behind him, mocking the decrees of the Jade Emperor, proclaiming himself the great sage equal to heaven. His enemies called him arrogant, his followers called him brilliant. All agreed he was unstoppable. The celestial palace reeled. Immortals whispered in the jade corridors. The Dragon Kings sulked in their sea palaces, humiliated by his thefts. The bureaucrats begged for order. At last, heaven unleashed its greatest armies, banners thick as storm clouds, drums shaking the stars. Wukong met them at the gates of his mountain. His laughter rang across the valleys, his staff whirled like a black sun, and the ground itself seemed to buck beneath his fury. Spears broke, armor dented. Every time he fell he rose again, immortal, grinning through the blood on his fur. But rebellion breeds enemies as surely as friends. Among the gods, the figure who rose against him was no mere general but the Buddha himself, the calm at the center of the storm. Where Wukong's strength was chaos, the Buddha's was stillness. He listened to the pleas of heaven and descended, not with an army, but with an open palm. He found Wukong still swaggering, his staff slung over his shoulder, his eyes bright with victory. "Do you truly believe yourself equal to heaven?" the Buddha asked, voice neither cruel nor kind. Wukong puffed his chest, his tail lashing with pride. "I am beyond equal. No chain binds me. No blade cuts me. No god can stop me." His voice thundered like war drums across the courtyard of heaven. The Buddha, calm as still water, did not flinch. He lifted one hand, palm open and steady, lines of fate etched across it like rivers on a map. "Then prove it," he said. "Leap from my palm. If you can truly escape, heaven is yours." The Monkey King threw back his head and laughed until his teeth flashed like ivory blades. "Your hand, so small, so fragile. How could it contain me?" With a shout he summoned his somersault cloud, the golden wisp that could carry him across the world in a single bound. He vaulted upward. a streak of fire against the sky. Stars blurred past. Constellations shattered like glass beneath his speed. At last he saw it. The edge of all things, where 5 colossal pillars rose out of the void into endless mist. Certain that he had broken free, he strutted to the nearest pillar. With a mischievous grin, he drew his name in bold strokes across the stone. To leave no doubt, he turned and relieved himself at its base, laughing until the sound echoed through the void. "Let heaven see," he boasted. "Even its farthest reaches bear my mark." He descended in a blaze, chest heaving, fur damp with sweat and pride. Landing before the Buddha, he cried out, "I went to the ends of the cosmos. None can match me, not even you." The Buddha's smile did not change. Slowly, almost gently, he raised his hand. Wukong's laughter choked in his throat. There, upon the curve of the Buddha's smallest finger, was the bold scrawl of his name. At the base of the thumb, an unmistakable stain marked the place where arrogance had outweighed wisdom. The Monkey King froze. The sky seemed to lurch sideways, the ground tilt beneath his feet. The Buddha's palm grew vast, fingers stretching like mountains, the thumb a ridge, the nails cliffs of polished stone. The hand closed, and what had seemed a trick of scale revealed itself as truth. Wukong had never left the Buddha's palm. All his leaps, all his speed, all his boasting had been a game inside a prison he had not seen. The hand pressed down, and the world became weight. 5 peaks formed of earth, metal, water, wood, and fire crashed into place, locking together into the 5 elements mountain. Wukong roared, shoved, transformed into beasts and storms, but the mountain did not shift. His voice cracked, his fury burned, and still he lay pinned, writhing beneath a burden that mocked his every boast. The immortal monkey, rebel of heaven, found himself caged not by chains or spears, but by the unanswerable weight of truth. Thus ended the rebellion of the Monkey King. Heaven's halls steadied, the celestial armies stood down, and the Jade Emperor sighed with relief. Yet the story does not end with chains and silence. Beneath the mountain, Wukong's laughter still echoed, muffled but unbroken. The Buddha decreed that in 500 years he would be freed, not as conqueror but as companion on a pilgrimage, his strength tempered, his ambition given a greater purpose. Until then, the mountain stood as a monument to power without measure, to chaos without restraint, to the lesson that even the boldest storm meets its stillness. And so, when thunder rolls sudden and mischievous laughter seems to spark between trees, some say it is only weather, only the wind. Others smile knowingly, for they remember the tale of Sun Wukong, trickster, warrior, rebel, king, who once shook heaven itself with the clang of his staff, and who still waits beneath stone, dreaming of the day he will leap again. Long ago, when the earth was young and rivers still learned their beds, the sky carried not 1 sun but 10. Each morning they rose together, blazing across the heavens in a chorus of fire, their light searing, their heat unbearable. The sea steamed, mountains split and fields withered into ash. Crops refused to sprout, animals collapsed in the dust. Mortals prayed to the heavens for relief, but the suns, proud in their splendor, ignored the pleas of those beneath. They danced like reckless children across the firmament, delighted in their own brilliance, blind to the ruin they left behind. From the villages came a hero, Hou Yi, a man of unmatched strength, an archer whose bow could hum like thunder and whose arrows flew swifter than a falcon in descent. He saw the suffering of the people, the bones whitening in the fields, and his heart burned hotter than the suns themselves. Taking his great bow, Carved from the wood of the sacred mulberry, he climbed the tallest mountain to confront the 10 blazing brothers who scorched the world. The sons laughed when they saw him. A mortal with sticks of wood dares challenge us? We are fire itself. We are eternity. They swirled together, their flames roaring, their arrogance as fierce as their light. Hou Yi planted his feet on the scorched rock and drew his bowstring. The mountains trembled at the strain. He loosed his first arrow, and a sun screamed, falling from the sky like molten stone, its fire extinguished as it struck the horizon. The earth gasped. The other sun shrieked in outrage and blazed hotter, determined to blind him, but Hou Yi's eyes remained steady. Again he drew. Again he loosed. Another sun fell, then another. One by one they tumbled from the heavens, their flames dying, their voices silenced. Each arrow flew straighter than the last, a song of salvation sung in bowstring and flight. When 9 had fallen, the heavens dimmed to a calm light. Rivers cooled, rains returned, and life trembled with relief. Yet the last sun, terrified, clung to its path across the sky, unwilling to abandon the world to darkness. Hou Yi lowered his bow. He knew one sun must remain, for without it, the earth would drown in cold. He let the last brother live, and in doing so restored balance. The people rejoiced. They called Hou Yi a savior, the archer who delivered the world from the furnace of the heavens. Villages celebrated with music, offerings, and dances by firelight, praising the man whose arrows had turned despair into dawn. But such deeds echo far beyond mortal feasts. The Jade Emperor, angered by the slaughter of his sons, saw Hou Yi's act not as salvation, but as sacrilege. Though the people adored him, the heavens withdrew their favor. Hou Yi found himself admired yet mistrusted, worshipped yet distanced from the very order he had served. The crown of heroism weighed heavily, for in saving the world he had set into motion forces that would unravel his joy. In those days, Hou Yi had a wife, Chang'e, whose beauty glowed like moonlight on still water. She was his solace, the quiet balance to his storm. To ease his weariness, Hou Yi sought a gift from the immortals, an elixir that would grant eternal life. He wished for years beside her, to share the peace he had won with his arrows. Yet destiny has sharp edges. The vial of immortality came into their keeping, small and bright, a secret treasure in their home. And it is here that the story bends toward sorrow. For though Hou Yi's arrows had saved the world, his heroism could not guard what he loved most. The elixir would pass from his hands into hers, and from hers into the heavens, carrying Chang'e away to a fate as luminous as it was lonely. The tale of Hou Yi ends in triumph shadowed by consequence, and the tale of Chang'e begins, a story not of fire and arrows, but of love stretched across the distance of the sky, of a goddess who rose where no mortal could follow, leaving behind the archer who once struck down suns. In the quiet that followed Hou Yi's great deed, when the world cooled from the blaze of 10 suns to the gentle warmth of one, the archer lived in peace with his wife, Chang'e. She was the moon's own reflection made flesh, serene, luminous, her laughter carrying the softness of water over stones. To the people, Hou Yi was the savior who shot down fire from the sky, but in his heart, Chang'e was the one who steadied him, who reminded him that a warrior's hands must also learn gentleness. Together they tended their home, shared cups of warm wine under the stars, and dreamed of long years to come. Yet heroes seldom walk without shadows. Hou Yi's fame spread wide, and with it came envy, whispers, and schemes. He feared that time itself might steal the joy he had found, and so he sought a way to hold it forever. From the Queen Mother of the West, he received a vial, the elixir of immortality, bright as molten pearl, swirling with a glow that never dimmed. To drink it was to rise beyond death, to join the ranks of undying beings. Hou Yi held the vial in his hands with reverence, but also hesitation. Immortality might grant them eternity, yet it would also pull them away from the life they had built among mortals. So he placed it in their home for safekeeping, intending to share it with Chang'e when the time was right. But the world is never free of hunger for power. One night, while Hou Yi was away hunting, an ambitious apprentice, greedy for immortality, forced his way into their home. He demanded the elixir from Chang'e, his eyes fevered with desire. Chang'e, knowing what chaos would follow if such a man seized eternity, clutched the vial to her chest. The house was silent except for the sound of her heart racing like a drum. She could not defeat him with strength, so she chose sacrifice. With a single breath, she raised the vial to her lips and drank. The elixir's light flooded through her. Her body grew weightless, her feet lifted from the earth. She reached for the doorway, for the soil she loved, for Hou Yi who was not yet home. But the sky had already claimed her. Through the roof she rose, robes billowing like clouds, hair streaming like ink across the heavens. Higher and higher she drifted, her tears scattering as pearls across the night. The thief cowered, blinded by the glow, as Chang'e ascended beyond his reach, beyond any mortal's reach. At last she came to rest upon the cold face of the moon. Its pale light embraced her, but its silence was endless. There she dwelt alone, her beauty untouched by time, her heart forever aching with memory of the earth below. From her window of silver light, she gazed down at Hou Yi's cottage, at the fields and forests they had walked together. He returned to find her gone, the elixir's vial empty, the air still humming with her absence. His cry shook the night, but no arrow could reach the moon. It is said that Hou Yi set an altar of fruits and cakes each year, hoping his offerings might climb the sky and bring comfort to his beloved. And people followed, lighting lanterns and laying mooncakes beneath the full moon, believing that on that night, Chang'e looks back toward earth with longing. Her face shines across the darkness, a reminder of love that endured, yet could not escape separation. And so her story lives forever in the glow of the moon above. But the tale does not end there. For where longing shines brightest, love may yet find bridges across the sky. The next chapter is of a girl who wove such bridges with stars themselves, the weaver girl whose fate, like Chang'e's, was bound by the heavens. There are stories that move like shadows, whispered by the riverbanks of Hangzhou, where willows lean over the water and the mists curl low across West Lake. Among them is the tale of Madame White Snake, a story of beauty and love, of loyalty tested, and of a fate that chained two hearts beneath heaven's stern gaze. It begins with a serpent spirit, ancient and cunning, who dwelled for centuries in the hidden places of the world, learning the ways of magic and patience. She had seen dynasties rise and fall, watched temples built and crumble, until at last she grew weary of solitude. In her heart grew a longing, not for power nor for conquest, but for love. One spring day, when the festival crowds filled the bridges with laughter and bright banners, the serpent spirit descended into the world of mortals, clothed in human form. Her skin was pale as ivory, her eyes glimmered like water beneath moonlight, and her hair flowed black as storm clouds. To those who saw her, she was no spirit, only a woman of unearthly grace. Among the throngs she met a man named Xu Xian, a gentle scholar of modest means. Their meeting was said to have been fated. Rain began to fall suddenly, and he offered her his umbrella. Under its canopy, their eyes met, and in that glance, something deeper than chance passed between them. From that moment, their lives entwined. They married, and the serpent spirit, now called Bai Suzhen, became a devoted wife. With Xu Xian, she built a household warm with laughter, fragrant with the steam of cooking rice and the perfume of herbs. She used her hidden powers to heal the sick, to bring prosperity to their pharmacy, and to shield her husband from misfortune. The people whispered of her skill, calling her blessed, though none guessed the truth of her nature. Xu Xian himself knew nothing. He saw only the woman he loved, whose kindness turned each day into a festival. Yet heaven rarely allows the worlds of spirit and mortal to mingle without consequence. A monk named Hou Yi, stern and vigilant, learned of Bai Suzhen's true form. To him, she was no devoted wife, but a serpent demon in disguise, a threat to the order of heaven and earth. In the silence of his temple, he prayed for guidance, and the echoes of the bells hardened his heart. Her beauty deceives, her kindness masks danger, he told himself. I will save the mortal man, though he curse me for it. On the festival of Duanwu, Hou Yi set his plan. He urged Xu Xian to offer his wife a cup of real Ga wine, a drink whose fiery strength reveals the forms of spirits. Xu Xian, naive and trusting, obeyed. Bai Suzhen lifted the cup with a smile, but when the wine burned through her veins, her body betrayed her. Before her husband's eyes, she transformed, a vast white serpent, scales glimmering like polished jade, eyes filled with sorrow and fear. Xu Xian fell back, his heart seizing with terror, and collapsed to the floor. Desperate to save him, Bai Suzhen fled to the mountains in search of a sacred herb said to revive the dead. Through storm and peril she journeyed, her serpent form striking against demons and guardians, until at last she returned, weary but triumphant. She pressed the herb to her husband's lips, and Xu Xian stirred, life returning to his face. Yet when his eyes opened, they filled not with joy but with confusion. Love still beat within him, but fear gnawed at its edges. Hou Yi's words festered in his mind, that he lay beside a demon, not a woman. Hou Yi struck then, wielding the authority of heaven. He captured Bai Suzhen, binding her with spells and dragging her to the banks of the lake where she and Xu Xian had once walked together. With chants and mantras he summoned a great pagoda, its stones carved with sutras, its weight heavier than chains. Beneath it he sealed her, declaring it her prison for eternity, so that her serpent soul could harm no one again. The earth trembled as the final stone locked into place, and silence spread over the water. Xu Xian wept. He came to the pagoda each day, laying offerings of flowers and incense at its base. Wife, he whispered into the cracks of stone, forgive me. If love counts for anything, it will wear through these walls. Some say his devotion softened the spirits of heaven. Others say it only deepened the tragedy. For though the pagoda stood firm, the moonlight seemed brighter on the nights he prayed, as if Bai Suzhen herself gazed down from beyond the prison's shadow. So the tale of Madam White Snake is told by lakeside storytellers, where ripples mirror the moon. It is a reminder that love may bridge worlds, yet laws written in heaven weigh heavier than the heart's desire. The pagoda still stands, and with it the whisper of her name, a serpent spirit who sought only to live as a woman, and who waits still beneath the stones for the day her love might set her free. In the days when the first emperor raised his vast ambitions into stone, the Great Wall stretched like a scar across the mountains. It was a monument of power, meant to hold back raiders from the north, but it was built with the lives of countless men. Farmers were seized from their fields, scholars torn from their studies, sons dragged from their mothers' arms. Among them was a man named Fan Qiliang, newlywed to a woman named Meng Jiangnü. Their love was fresh as spring, their vows still warm in the air when soldiers came to claim him for the emperor's labor. He kissed her hands, promised his return, and vanished among the marching ranks of conscripts bound for the wall. For months, Meng Jiangnü waited. She kept their house, tended the garden, and sewed clothes against the winter she feared he would face. When the leaves began to fall, she stitched a padded robe, soft and warm, and set out on the long road north. She walked past villages hollowed of men, past rivers running thick with mud, past mountains where the sky seemed to press low with sorrow. At each milestone she asked after her husband, showing his name to guards and labourers. All shook their heads. Some looked away. Still she pressed on, carrying the robe as if it were her heart-made cloth. At last she reached the Great Wall. It rose against the horizon like the spine of some vast beast, bricks red with the blood of those who had laid them. The air smelled of sweat and dust, of lime and mortar, of grief too tired for tears. Meng Jiangnü asked again for Fan Qiliang. This time, an overseer looked at her robe, then at her eyes, and told her the truth. Her husband was gone, his body buried within the wall itself, another stone among stones. Her knees gave way. She clutched the robe to her chest, but there was no one left to wear it. She pressed her face to the ground and wept. Her cries rose above the mountains, above the banners snapping in the wind, above the pride of the empire that demanded silence. She wept until her breath tore, until her body shook, until the very heavens seemed to listen. And then the wall began to tremble. Stone cracked, mortar split. Towers that had taken years to build groaned like trees in a storm. A section of the Great Wall collapsed in a thunder of dust and ruin, and from within its rubble spilled the bones of the countless dead. Among them lay the remains of Fan Qiliang. Meng Jiangnü fell to her knees beside him, tears carving tracks in the dust of centuries, and laid the robe across his body. For a moment the wind stilled. The empire itself seemed to hold its breath. The emperor raged when he heard. He sent soldiers to seize her, but even he could not undo what grief had accomplished. Some say she cursed him to his face before throwing herself into the river, vanishing into its waters as if grief itself had claimed her. Others say she wandered until the end of her days, carrying the memory of her husband like a flame that never dimmed. The wall was rebuilt, stone upon stone, but the story of its breaking endured. To this day, travellers who walk the length of the Great Wall sometimes pause at its crumbling sections, where ivy claws at the bricks and the earth presses in. They say the air there tastes faintly of salt, as if the tears of Meng Jiangnü still linger, reminding emperors and common folk alike that even the mightiest work of power may yield before the grief of a single heart. In a quiet village of ancient China, where mulberry trees swayed in the wind and streams curled through fields of green, there lived a young woman named Zhu Yingtai. She was clever, spirited, and thirsted for knowledge, but the schools of the time admitted only men. So she bound her hair, donned a scholar's robe, and set out disguised as a boy to study. Her steps were light, her heart full of courage, and fate watched with a hidden smile, for it had already woven her path with another's. At the academy, Zhu Yingtai met Liang Shanbo, a fellow student with a gentle spirit and a mind as sharp as a blade. They read by the same lamps, shared scrolls and ink, and walked side by side beneath blossoming trees. To Liang, Zhu was the brother he had never known. To Zhu, Liang was the soul her heart had long searched for. She laughed with him, teased him, and cherished him, yet dared not speak the truth of her disguise. Still, love bloomed quietly between their words, growing stronger with each passing season. When their years of study ended, Zhu invited Liang to her family home, hinting at her secret by suggesting he wed her sister. But before the truth could be spoken, her family revealed their will. Zhu was already promised to a wealthy merchant, a man of rank and riches, but no kindness. Liang's joy shattered. He returned home pale with grief. Yet the echo of her laughter haunted him. His love, forbidden yet unbroken, consumed him like a fever. Not long after, Liang fell ill. Some say it was sickness, others say it was sorrow made flesh. He wasted away, his strength failing, until one day his inkstone slipped from his hand, and with it, his last breath. He was buried on a hillside beneath willows, where the wind carried whispers through the grass. When Zhu Yingtai heard, her heart cracked like porcelain. On the day of her wedding, as the procession neared Liang's grave, thunder rolled across the sky, though no storm had been foretold. Zhu broke from the bridal ranks, her veil trailing in the dust, and ran to his tomb. She flung herself against the mound, calling his name until the earth itself trembled. The grave split open with a sound like a sigh. Without hesitation, she leapt inside, choosing eternity with him over a lifetime without. The storm ceased. From the earth rose two butterflies, wings painted with colors finer than silk. They circled one another in the air, drifting higher, freer, more radiant with every turn. The villagers watched in awe as the pair danced above the willows, no longer bound by duty or death, only by love. The butterflies vanished into the sky, but their story remained, whispered by mothers to daughters, sung by storytellers by lantern light, retold by lovers who pressed hands together in the moonlight, and vowed that nothing, not even death, could keep their souls apart. So the tale of Liang Shanbo and Zhu Yingtai endures, a tragedy made eternal. On spring days when butterflies weave among blossoms, many pause and smile, believing they have seen the lovers once more, reunited, inseparable, forever free. Far in the northernmost seas, beyond the lands known to men, lies an ocean so deep that even the stars seem afraid to gaze upon its floor. Its waters are black as ink, its waves rise like mountains, and within its fathomless depths swims a creature vast beyond imagining. This was the Kun, a fish so large that sailors swore whole islands could rest upon its back, its scales shimmering like slabs of jade. The sea churned when it stirred, and storms were born in its wake. Yet even in its enormity, the Kun harboured a restlessness, for the ocean was a prison of salt and pressure, and its heart longed for skies it had never touched. Legends say that the Kun swam in silence for centuries, circling the cold abyss, hearing only the groan of shifting ice and the cries of whales. But one day, as it rose near the surface, the sunlight pierced the water and struck its eye. In that instant something awakened. A vision of endless sky, of clouds drifting like silver shoals, of winds carrying freedom no current could match. The fish's body trembled, its scales rattling like 1,000 drums. Its spine arched, and with a cry that shook the heavens, the Kun began to change. Its fins split and lengthened into vast wings, feathers spilling outward in waves like storm-tossed clouds. its tail stretched into a tapering plume, sharp as a comet's trail. The ocean surged as the body of the fish unfurled into the form of a colossal bird, its wingspan so great it shadowed whole provinces when it rose from the sea. This was the Peng, the boundless bird, whose flight carried it 9,000 li into the sky, whose wings beat with the power of hurricanes, whose cry thundered across the horizons. Where once it had known only the weight of water, now it ruled the currents of air. The Peng soared past mountain ranges, its wings brushing peaks until glaciers cracked. It climbed through storms, scattering thunderheads as sparrows scatter leaves. The sun itself seemed a companion at its side, rising and setting along the arc of its journey. Mortal eyes lifted from fields and rivers, struck dumb by the shadow of its passage. Some trembled, calling it an omen of change. Others fell to their knees, whispering prayers for its favor. Philosophers, watching its ascent, spoke of ambition unchained, of the soul's longing to rise beyond limits, of the truth that greatness often dwells unseen until the moment of transformation. But the Peng's journey was not without peril. The smaller birds mocked it, chattering from branches as it rose. "Why fly so high?" they jeered. "Why not rest content with the winds we know, with the branches we claim?" The Peng did not answer, for their voices never reached the altitudes it sought. It soared beyond their sight, chasing the horizon where the blue of the sky deepened into the black of eternity. There, in the thin silence, the world below seemed a memory, and the creature who had once been Kun understood what it meant to be limitless. In the texts of sages, the tale of Kun and Peng is told not merely as myth but as parable. The fish bound by the sea, the bird freed by the sky, both are one spirit, one will, one ambition that refuses confinement. To transform is to shatter boundaries, to rise where none believed possible. So when waves crash endlessly upon northern shores and flocks of migratory birds wheel together in the dusk, the old storytellers remind their listeners, somewhere beyond, the Kun still swims, the Peng still soars, and within every heart lies the same yearning to break free, to rise higher, and to become more than the world has yet allowed. The sea stretched vast and unbroken, its waves glittering like fields of hammered bronze beneath the sun. To the east, beyond the horizon, lay the Isles of the Blessed, a realm where the peaches of immortality grew, where gardens bloomed in eternal spring, and where no sorrow or illness could ever dwell. Many dreamed of reaching those shores, but only a rare few possessed the daring, wit, or strength to attempt the crossing. Among them were the Eight Immortals, a band of wanderers bound together not by blood or empire, but by the curious thread of destiny and mischief. They were as different as moonlight and thunder, each a story unto themselves. Lu Dongbin, scholar and swordsman, his blade sharper than his wit only on rare occasions. Han Xiangzi, the carefree musician, whose flute could coax blossoms from stone. Tieguai Li, the beggar with the iron crutch, whose gourd brimmed with elixirs and secrets. Yi Xianggu, the maiden with a lotus flower, her steps as light as drifting petals. Zhang Guolao, the eccentric elder, riding his paper mule backward, with a laugh that confused both sages and spirits. Cao Guozhu, the nobleman in courtly robes, still carrying dignity though he had abandoned wealth. Lan Kaihe, the androgynous singer clad in patched clothes, tossing flowers into the air as if scattering joy itself. And Zhong Quan, the great alchemist with a fan that could turn stones into gold, or revive the weary with a single sweep. The immortals arrived at the shore together, each gazing out at the endless sea. A golden bridge, summoned by their collective power, could have carried them across. But Lu Dongbin chuckled, eyes glittering with mischief. Too easy. If we are truly immortals, why not each test our own strength? Let us cross with only the powers we carry, and see who reaches the isles first. The others agreed, laughing, for none feared the waves, though each knew the sea would demand something different from them. First was Li. Planting his iron crutch in the surf, he stepped upon it as though it were solid earth. With one push he glided forward, the crutch lengthening beneath him like the mast of a ship, carrying him steady across the churning water. Fishes leapt in his wake, dazzled by the scent of his elixirs. Behind him, Han Xiangzi lifted his flute and played a lilting tune. The melody spun into a bridge of sound, each note rising and falling like stepping stones across the waves. With every chord, lotus blossoms unfurled upon the water, carrying him gently eastward, as if the sea itself danced to his song. He Xiang, serene and graceful, set her lotus flower upon the tide. It grew large enough to cradle her, a living raft drifting steady as the moon's reflection. She sat upon it, her gaze tranquil, and wherever she floated the storms calmed, the winds softened, and even the sea creatures paused to bask in her presence. Meanwhile, Zhang Guolao summoned his strange paper mule, unfolded from the smallest slip tucked behind his ear. The mule stamped once, neighed like thunder, and galloped across the surface of the waves, as if the ocean were no more than a meadow of grass. He rode it backward, of course, laughing all the while. Lan Kai skipped lightly over the water, scattering flowers from their basket. Each blossom hardened into a floating tile, just long enough to bear their weight before dissolving back into fragrance. Their laughter echoed across the waves, carefree and bright, confusing even the gulls that wheeled above. Qiao Guojiu, the nobleman, moved more solemnly. He lifted his jade tablet, once a symbol of authority at court, and struck it against the air. Waves parted before him, and a path of still water stretched straight and true, reflecting his unwavering dignity. Step by measured step, he crossed as though the sea itself bowed to his presence. Zhongli Quan came last. Raising his fan, he swept it once across the horizon. The sea boiled, then settled, reshaped by his command. A great wind rose to cradle him, bearing him aloft as if he was seated on an invisible throne of clouds. He drifted across the sky above the ocean, his beard streaming like a banner, his laughter rolling like distant thunder. Below, the others glanced upward, each shaking their heads. "Always the dramatic one," Lu Dongbin muttered, though his eyes twinkled with amusement. As for Lu Dongbin himself, he tapped the pommel of his sword. With a whisper it leapt into the air, gleaming with immortal light. He mounted it as one might a steed, and it carried him swift as lightning, skimming the sea's surface, spraying arcs of foam in his wake. He saluted the others as he passed, half in jest, half in challenge, his robe snapping in the salt wind. The 8 Immortals, each by their own gift, crossed the boundless sea. Along the way they faced trials, waves rising as high as mountains, whirlpools that gnashed like teeth, spirits of the deep who tested their resolve. Li calmed the waters with a drop of elixir. Han Xiangzi charmed the spirits with song, and Zhongli Quan's fan banished storms with a single sweep. They laughed at danger, bickered in jest, and cheered one another on, for though they crossed separately, they remained a band bound by friendship. At last, the mist parted, and the isles of the blessed shimmered before them, their shores golden with immortal blossoms, their air fragrant with peaches that never spoiled. One by one, the immortals arrived, greeted not as intruders, but as kindred souls. For they had proven that true immortality is not merely in the body, but in the courage to cross seas, to test one's limits, and to laugh while doing so. And so the tale of the 8 Immortals crossing the sea is told with laughter and song, a reminder that destiny may be approached in many ways, but what matters is that each finds their own path, and together all may reach the shining shore. Long before the names of dynasties were etched into bamboo slips, before the rights of kings shaped the Middle Kingdom, the land was a patchwork of tribes, each with its own chieftain, each vying for dominance. Among them rose 2 figures destined to clash: Chiyou, warlord of chaos, and Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor, whose wisdom and ingenuity would forge the path toward unity. Their struggle was not only for dominion of Earth, but for the very balance between disorder and order, between storm and civilization. Chiyou was no ordinary warlord. Legends describe him as a monster in human form, his body clad in bronze, his head crowned with horns, his voice a growl that rolled like thunder. Some said he had the head of a bull, others that his face glistened with iron, his breath trailing smoke. He commanded 72 clans of fearsome warriors, many said to be half-beast themselves. Where Chiyou marched, chaos followed. Rivers ran red, crops trampled underfoot, and the drums of war beat without rest. His armies wielded weapons of bronze, blades sharp and cruel, and his shamans conjured fog and storm to blind their enemies. To the tribes weary of endless bloodshed, he seemed like the very embodiment of destruction. Opposing him was Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor. Unlike Chiyou, he was not remembered for brute strength, but for ingenuity and foresight. He ruled with rituals that bound the people together, with medicines that healed, and with inventions that lightened labor. Where Chiyou was storm, Huangdi was structure. Yet he knew that reason alone could not tame the chaos rising at his borders. He gathered his allies, uniting clans who longed for stability, and prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Their armies met on the fields of Zhuolu. The earth shook beneath the charge of thousands, banners snapping in the gale, horns braying across the plain. Chiyou unleashed his war magic. Clouds roiled black as ink, winds howled, and rain slashed down like blades. His soldiers, clad in iron-like skin, bellowed as they pushed forward, their weapons gleaming cruelly in the storm. The allied tribes of Huangdi faltered, blinded by the fog, their lines breaking beneath the onslaught. For a moment, it seemed chaos would consume order. But Huangdi, ever watchful, had prepared. From his camp he released a device of his own making, the first south-pointing chariot, a wooden cart with a figure that always faced the cardinal directions, no matter how the wheels turned. Guided by this marvel, his soldiers found their way through the fog, regrouping where others would have been lost. He rallied them with clarity, his voice steady against the storm, reminding them that they fought not for conquest, but for the peace of the land. The battle raged for days. Spears shattered, arrows darkened the sky, and the fields of Zhuolu drank deeply of blood. At last, Huangdi called upon the celestial forces. He prayed to heaven, and Yinglong, the winged dragon who had once aided Yu the Great, descended from the clouds. With a roar that split the storm, Yinglong unleashed torrents of rain to quench Chiyou's sorcery, and its wings scattered the choking fog. The battlefield cleared, and for the first time, the armies of Huangdi saw their foe unveiled. Chiyou, towering and terrible, fought at the front of his army. His horns gleamed, his eyes burned, and his voice shook the ground. None could match him in single combat. He He crushed men with his iron arms, shattered blades against his hide. Yet Huangdi's forces pressed on, guided by discipline and by inventions that multiplied their strength, drums to coordinate attacks, banners to signal across the field, chariots that struck swift and hard. Slowly, inexorably, the tide turned. At last, Chiyou was seized by the warriors of Huangdi, bound with chains forged by heaven's decree. Some say he raged so fiercely that the earth trembled, his voice echoing long after his body had fallen. Others say he was beheaded, his skull buried deep in the earth to prevent his spirit from rising again. Where his blood spilled, the grass withered. Where his breath ceased, the wind calmed. The chaos he embodied was broken, but never entirely forgotten. With Chiyou's defeat, the tribes of the land bowed to Huangdi. The Yellow Emperor established his reign, weaving laws and customs, teaching farming, medicine, and governance. From his victory at Zhuolu sprang the first vision of a united realm, a world where order could stand against chaos, where invention could outlast destruction. The echoes of that battle still resound in the myths of China, for it was there, beneath the storm-torn skies, that the foundation of civilization itself was laid. And yet, storytellers say, on certain nights when thunder rolls without rain and the wind howls across empty plains, one can still hear the roar of Chiyou, the defeated warlord of chaos, calling from the shadows of history, a reminder that order is never given, only won, and must be guarded with each generation. In the time when gods and spirits still walked openly among mortals, the coastal lands trembled under storms, for the dragon kings of the seas ruled with tempests. It was there, at the edge of the East China Sea, that a child was born who would shake heaven and earth alike, Nezha, the lotus-born warrior. His birth itself was a marvel. His father, General Li Jing, awaited the arrival of a son, but what emerged was no ordinary infant. From a blooming lotus flower in the courtyard pond, Nezha stepped forth, already a boy of 3 years, his face bright as dawn, his eyes flashing like stars. His body carried the fragrance of blossoms, his laugh rang like bells, and his very presence filled the air with divine energy. His father recoiled at the strangeness, but his mother embraced him, sensing that destiny had touched their household. Nezha grew quickly, and though still a child, he wielded strength and sorcery beyond mortal measure. A Taoist immortal, Taiyi Genren, took him as disciple and bestowed upon him gifts of power, the red armillary sash, blazing like living flame, the cosmic wheel of wind and fire, which he wore upon his feet to ride the skies, and a golden spear that gleamed like lightning. With these, Nezha soared above the waves, leaving trails of fire across the heavens, a boy whose laughter was as fearless as his blows. Yet power often draws trouble as surely as storms follow thunder. One day while playing by the seashore, Nezha encountered the third son of the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea, Hou Yi. The prince, proud and arrogant, demanded tribute from mortals, terrorizing fishermen and stirring the waters into chaos. Nezha, indignant at the suffering of innocents, defied him. Their quarrel ignited into battle. Spears clashed, waves rose into towering walls, and lightning laced the sky. Though Hou Yi was a prince of the seas, Nezha struck him down with the might of his spear. The dragon's body fell upon the sand, his blood staining the tide red. The sea roared in fury. From the depths, the Dragon King rose, storm-crowned and vengeful. He stormed to heaven itself, demanding justice, threatening to drown the mortal lands unless Nezha was delivered to him. The Jade Emperor trembled at the rage of the seas, and Li Jing, Nezha's father, fell into despair. His own son had brought ruin upon their house and doom upon their people. He raised his sword, prepared to offer Nezha's life in sacrifice to appease the dragons. But Nezha did not flinch. His eyes burned with sorrow and defiance both. "Father," he said, "I will not allow my family or the innocent to suffer for my hand. I was given this life by heaven, and I will return it." With a final bow to his parents, he took a dagger and cut deep into his own flesh, returning blood and bone to his father and mother as repayment for their gift of life. His body fell lifeless to the earth, and his spirit drifted into the silence of death. The Dragon Kings, seeing his sacrifice, withdrew their vengeance. The seas calmed, though grief lingered in Nezha's household. Li Jing burned incense for his lost son, while Nezha's mother wept at the shrine she raised in his memory. Yet the tale does not end in ashes. From the depths of the netherworld, Nezha's spirit cried out with unbroken will. He prayed to his master, Taiyi Zhenren, who heard and answered. With divine craft, the immortal forged a new body from lotus roots, pure and incorruptible, binding it with celestial light. Into it, Nezha's soul was reborn. He rose again, clad in lotus petals that blazed brighter than armor, his spear gleaming, his wheels of wind and fire spinning at his feet. No longer flesh and blood, but a being of spirit and divine power, Nezha had transcended death itself. His laughter rang once more across the skies, fierce, youthful, unyielding. To the Dragon Kings his return was a warning. To mortals it was salvation. To his parents it was both grief and miracle. A son lost and found, mortal ties severed yet divine destiny fulfilled. Thus Nezha became more than a child warrior. He became a symbol of defiance, of sacrifice, of redemption, one who would fight not only the arrogance of dragons, but the injustices of heaven itself. And to this day, when fireworks streak the sky and drums thunder in the streets, the people remember the boy born of Lotus, who dared to stand against gods and kings, and who rose anew, untouched by chains of mortality. In the long corridors of Chinese memory, where myth and history entwine, there emerges an idea both fragile and unyielding: the mandate of heaven. Unlike crowns wrought of gold or thrones carved of stone, this was no treasure one could seize or build. It was unseen, intangible, a current flowing between heaven and earth. To hold it was to rule in harmony with the cosmos. To lose it was to become ash in the wind of time. It was not mere superstition, but the heartbeat of dynasties, the language by which emperors explained both triumph and downfall. Heaven, the ancients said, was not blind. It watched. When a ruler governed with justice, fed the hungry honored ancestors, and upheld the balance of ritual, the sky itself seemed to bless the land. Harvests were bountiful, rivers gentle, and the people content. This was proof that the mandate lay upon the sovereign, shimmering like invisible armor around the throne. But when greed grew, when corruption festered and the cries of the people went unanswered, heaven's patience waned. Its signs appeared first as whispers: droughts, earthquakes, eclipses, floods. To some they were misfortune, to others they were warnings carved across the sky. The mandate was slipping. In this way, the mandate of heaven tied human rule to cosmic balance. The emperor was called the Son of Heaven, but he was no god himself. He was a bridge, a steward chosen by the will of heaven to maintain harmony between the realms. His legitimacy endured only so long as he honored that trust. If he failed, heaven would revoke its favor, and rebellion became not treason, but justice. Armies could march, banners could rise, and the people could turn against their sovereign, knowing that their defiance echoed heaven's own decree. The fall of the Shang dynasty became the first great tale of this doctrine. King Zhou of Shang, once powerful, descended into cruelty. He raised towers of wine, forests of meat, feasted while his people starved, and silenced all who opposed him with fire and blood. At last, heaven's patience ended. Signs abounded. Storms tore through the land, famine spread, strange stars crossed the sky. The people whispered that the mandate had abandoned Shang. When King Wu of Zhou rose in rebellion, his cause was no mere uprising, but the fulfillment of heaven's will. The Shang were cast down, and the Zhou proclaimed that they ruled not by conquest alone, but by the mandate of heaven, an authority higher than swords, broader than kingdoms. For centuries after, dynasties rose and fell to the rhythm of this unseen law. The Han spoke of heaven's favor when their banners triumphed. Rebels cried that heaven had withdrawn it when floods drowned villages, or locusts devoured fields. Each change of dynasty was written as a cosmic correction, a great pendulum swinging between order and corruption. In this way, the mandate gave meaning to chaos, explaining why empires collapsed and why new rulers emerged from the dust. To the people, the mandate was both comfort and warning. Comfort, because it promised no tyrant could rule forever. Warning, because it reminded even the most virtuous king that he was only a guest upon the throne, answerable to something greater. The mandate was both sword and shield, a justification for power and a check upon it. Thus the mandate of heaven endures not only as myth, but as philosophy. It is the echo of the gods in the affairs of men, the belief that the cosmos itself bends toward balance. When an emperor gazed at an eclipse, when peasants prayed for rain, when generals weighed rebellion in the silence of night, all listened for the same truth. Does heaven still favor us, or has its gaze turned away? And so the tale of gods and kings entwined. The thunder of battle, the weight of law, the sorrow of famine, all became signs in the great dialogue between earth and sky. The mandate of heaven was never written in stone, but in the shifting clouds, in the trembling earth, in the breath of the people themselves. A ruler who forgot this truth would fall, and from his ruin another would rise, bearing the same fragile, luminous gift, the favor of heaven, given only until it must be given anew. The Shang dynasty was dying. Its king, Zhou, once a ruler of power and promise, had descended into cruelty so deep it blackened the very heavens. He raised palaces of indulgence, tortured the innocent for sport, and feasted while his people starved. Fires burned at his command, not to warm homes, but to consume those who displeased him. The cries of the people reached beyond the clouds, and the gods themselves turned their gaze upon the Middle Kingdom. The moment had come for balance to be restored, for heaven to withdraw its favor from Shang and grant it to another. Among mortals, one man rose to bear heaven's will, Jiangnü. He was no youthful warrior crowned with glory, but an elder with hair already touched by frost. For years he had lived in seclusion, fishing by the banks of the Wei River, waiting for destiny to call. When King Wen of Zhou sought men of wisdom to aid his cause, his chariot passed Jiangzia's humble perch. At that moment, it was said, the old fisherman cast his hook into the sky instead of the water, for he fished not for carp, but for kings. King Wen recognized him as heaven's chosen advisor, and Jiangzia rose to guide the Zhou toward their destiny. The struggle between Shang and Zhou was no mere clash of armies. It was a war that drew in spirits, immortals, and demons alike. On the side of Shang fought sorcerers and monstrous generals, wielding spells of fire and wind. On the side of Zhou, Jiangnü rallied heroes of every stripe, loyal warriors, scholars, hermits from the mountains, and celestial beings who descended to lend their strength. Battles shook the land like earthquakes, lightning split the skies, and the rivers themselves seemed to recoil from the blood that spilled into their currents. Jiangxi's brilliance lay not only in strategy, but in vision. He knew that heaven's mandate was shifting, and that this war was not only about replacing one dynasty with another. It was a reckoning, a great investiture of spirits. Every deed, every sacrifice, every triumph on the battlefield carved new places in the celestial order. When a hero fell, Jiangxia called upon the gods to enshrine their souls among the stars, raising them to immortality as generals of thunder, guardians of rivers, or wardens of sacred mountains. In this way, the fallen were not lost, but transformed into divine protectors of the new age. The war climaxed at Muye, where the armies of Zhou, though fewer in number, marched with banners that snapped like dragon wings in the wind. Opposite them stood the legions of Shang, fierce but wavering, for the people no longer believed their king held heaven's favor. As battle joined, Zhou soldiers fought with the strength of destiny, their spears thrust like lightning bolts. The Shang army, weakened by corruption and fear, faltered. King Zhou fled to his palace, where flames consumed him as heaven's judgment fell. With his death, the Shang dynasty ended, and the Zhou rose to rule beneath the mandate of heaven. When the smoke cleared, Jiangxia stood at the threshold of a new era. But his work was not done. With brush and register he performed the great investiture, inscribing the names of heroes and spirits into the book of gods. Each was granted divine office according to their deeds. The brave became generals of heaven's hosts. The wise became gods of rivers and stars. The loyal became guardians of mountains and winds. Even those who had fought for Shang but fell with honor were enshrined, for the balance of the cosmos demanded recognition of all who shaped destiny. Thus the war became more than the founding of the Zhou dynasty. It became the forging of a celestial bureaucracy, a mirror of the mortal empire, where every god had a place and every spirit a duty. The heavens grew more ordered, more complete, their ranks filled with those who had once walked the earth. Jiangxia, the fisherman who cast his hook into fate's current, had helped to shape not only a dynasty, but the very structure of heaven itself. And so the story of the investiture of the gods is told as both legend and lesson, that mortal deeds echo beyond a single lifetime, that courage and sacrifice can carve one's name into the fabric of the cosmos. For in the eyes of heaven, to act with righteousness is to step upon the path of divinity, and those who dare may rise from the dust of battle to the constellations above. The sky above China has always been alive with memory. When lanterns rise into the night during the festival of the moon, their soft glow is said to carry the longing of Chang'e. When firecrackers crackle at the new year, their thunder still echoes the wrath of demons driven back by the courage of mortals. In the painted masks of opera, Nezha spins upon the stage with his wheels of wind and fire. Qiongqi charges in with sword raised, laughter rolling like thunder. The Monkey King bounds across the boards, defiant and triumphant all at once. To see these things is to know that the old myths never left. They walk among the people still, not as distant relics, but as companions woven into daily life. The gods and heroes are called in prayers spoken before altars, in incense spirals burning slow and steady in temples, in the gestures of filial piety at tomb-sweeping festivals. Farmers still look to the dragon kings when rain is scarce. Lovers still speak of the magpies that bridge the Milky Way. Children listen wide-eyed to tales of carp leaping the dragon gate, or of Hou Yi's arrows chasing suns from the sky, and in their eyes the myths are fresh, unbroken. In grief, the people remember Meng Jiangnü's tears. In ambition, they recall the vast wings of the Pangu. These are not stories of a vanished past. They are voices at the table, reminders of how close the mortal world lies to the divine. For to be Chinese is to carry a legacy that is not only historical, but mythic. A sense that time stretches far behind, and farther still ahead. The myths are not clung to out of nostalgia. They are lived, season by season, festival by festival, word by word. In hardship, they grant endurance. In celebration, they give shape to joy. They mold understandings of truth, of justice, of beauty, and of fate. And in a world that often sways without anchor, they provide a foundation, the memory of a sky once ruled by dragons, goddesses, heroes, and immortals. So long as incense curls upward, so long as stories are whispered beneath moonlight, the myths will continue, not as fantasy, but as the quiet heartbeat of a people who remember where they came from. And so, the drums fall silent, the rivers calm, the voices of emperors and demon slayers, lovers and immortals fade into the hush of night, but they do not vanish. They retreat into memory, into the folds of language, the rhythm of festivals, the stillness before a story begins. Chinese mythology does not end. It lingers. In every lantern lit against darkness, in every prayer for rain, in the laughter of a child who first hears the name Sun Wukong. These were never only tales of gods and monsters. They were mirrors of the soul, of loyalty in love, of sacrifice in sorrow, of ambition reaching beyond horizons, of harmony sought again and again across the ages. Perhaps, dear listener, you feel it now. That hush. That sense that something vast and ancient has passed close. If you're still with us, thank you, truly, for your time, your stillness, your listening. In a world that rushes and pulls, you chose to slow down, to breathe, to remember. You have walked with us through the birth of heaven and earth, across rivers tamed by dragons, through palaces in the clouds and tears at the wall, into the embrace of gods and the defiance of rebels. These myths are not history, they are inheritance, and in hearing them, you have become part of the long tradition that keeps them alive. So let us part gently, let the lanterns dim, let the stars return to their place above the jade mountains, watchful and unblinking. The names, Nüwa, Hou Yi, Sun Wukong, Chang'e, Huangdi, Nezha, they will rest now, but they are never gone. They wait in the corners of dreams, in the silence after incense burns out, in the shimmer of moonlight across still water. Sleep well now. May your night be free of demons, and your dreams filled with dragons in flight, rivers made golden with dawn, and the quiet footsteps of stories that always find their way home.